Hi there and welcome back to our reading of All the Young Dudes. This part will cover chapters 131 to 140. Chapter 131, 7th Year, Interlude. Tuesday the 24th of January, 1978, 7:50 a.m. James woke them on Tuesday morning, calling through the curtains, "Oi, Padfoot, get up! Nearly 8, you lazy sod." "I've got a free study day, arsehole, piss off." Sirius groaned in reply, burying his head under his pillow. "You'll miss breakfast." "Ugh." "Fine, starve then," James replied. Then, "Seen Mooney? His bed's empty. Don't think he should be off on his own, do you?" Sirius lifted the pillow from his face and looked at Remus, raising an eyebrow in question. Remus stared back in panic. Okay, James knew, but so far they'd managed to avoid his having any actual encounters with their relationship. Remus was very particular about it. He didn't want to be gawked at. He wanted to prove that everything was just the same as before, and that meant that what happened between him and Sirius in private ought to be kept, well, private. He'd been fastidious about bed-sharing, making sure to get up early and creep back to his own bed, or else rumple his bed-sheets and head straight for the shower. But it was the full moon, and he was slower than usual. "Probably gone for breakfast, mate," Sirius called back. He shrugged at Remus. "Yeah, maybe," James agreed. "Oh, hang on, I'll check the map. He's left it on his bedside table." Remus slapped his head, astounded by his own stupidity. "I'm in here, James," he shouted quickly, feeling himself turn red with embarrassment. "Oh!" They heard James stop still, just outside the bed curtains. "Oh, right, of course. Sorry, I didn't think—" His steps receded quickly towards the door. "Sorry, lads. See you later, eh?" The door slammed shut. Sirius snorted with laughter as Remus crawled under the sheets, as if he could escape the embarrassment there. "Oh, come on," Sirius laughed, trying to pull the sheets back. "It wasn't that bad." "It's horrible," Remus replied, burying himself further. "I'll never be able to look him in the eye again." Sirius crawled under the sheets too, chasing him. "It's not like we were doing anything. You've still got your pyjamas on." "Prongs doesn't know that," Remus retorted, sitting cross-legged, facing Sirius. It was like they were under their own little tent now and reminded Remus of camping. That was such a nice memory that he felt a bit calmer. Even better, Sirius always held his hand when they were hidden away like this, and he reached out now, playing with Remus's long, scarred fingers as though they were precious treasure. "I don't see what the fuss is about," Sirius mused, lacing his soft white fingers between Remus's, then splaying them out, then wiggling them like a children's game. "I'm sure he already assumes some things." "See, you can't say it either." "Well, I'm a gentleman," Sirius smirked, looking up at him now. Even in the dark, Remus could feel Sirius's eyes burning. He was biting his lip too. Remus gave a little sigh, and Sirius quirked an eyebrow. "At least we know we've got the room to ourselves." He placed a hand on each of Remus's knees and leaned in. Remus kissed him, but pushed him away. "No way. If we don't go down there right now, James is definitely going to think we're shagging. Being physically intimate," Remus said piously. Sirius burst out laughing again and rolled back on the bed. "Oh, Mooney, you kill me. What happened to that rough little yob I used to know?" "Some posh boy taught him to read," Remus replied dryly, flinging back the covers and rubbing the static out of his curls. "Right. Quick shower, then we'll go down." He jumped out of bed, wincing a bit at the bright sunlight filling the dorm room. "I like the sound of that," Sirius called from the bed as Remus crossed the floor. In the bathroom doorway he turned and gave Sirius his most withering look. "Downstairs, pervert." 8:30 a.m. James couldn't quite look at either of them in the eye as it happened, much to Sirius's amusement. Peter had his head down too, quietly shoveling porridge into his mouth, and for a horrifying moment Remus wondered whether he had told James exactly what he had seen in their bedroom only a few short days ago. That would be too much to come back from, Remus was sure. He distracted himself by listening to Mary talk, which was always easy to do. She was going out with a boy on the Hufflepuff Quidditch team these days and was simultaneously extolling his virtues and bemoaning the pitfalls of seeing an athlete. Remus couldn't help but think that Mary was preaching to the choir a bit, as of course Lily, and, if Sirius was to be believed, Marlene were both going out with Quidditch players too. I mean, obviously he's fit, like Adonis level. She gushed dreamily. And talk about stamina. Marlene was rolling her eyes, and James was staring fixedly at his cup of tea while Lily giggled behind her hands. Mary was gloriously oblivious in her element. But then he has the gall to whine about thigh-chafing from his bloody broom, she cackled. James's ears had turned bright red, and Sirius was trying to catch his eye, a manic grin on his face. Mary carried on. I told him if he thinks that's uncomfortable, he should try bleeding from his snatch 5 days a month. Peter practically choked on his porridge. Lily covered her face, and Marlene slammed her hand on the table. Fucking hell, Mary, do you have to? What? Mary sat up, blinking, looking as though butter wouldn't melt on her wicked tongue. Well, you're being a bit graphic for the breakfast table, Lily said diplomatically. We're all adults, aren't we? Mary arched an eyebrow. We're mature enough to talk about sex. Right, I'd better be off. James leapt to his feet, uncharacteristically clumsy, rattling the table as he did so. Lily looked up at him, surprised. Where are you going? Potions. It's not for another 15. Okay, wait, I'll come with you. She got up, still giving her boyfriend a strange look, and they left together. Didn't know James was such a prude, Mary commented. Oh, it wasn't you, MacDonald, Sirius explained, stretching his arms over his head and tousling his long hair. Prongsy boy just had a bit of a surprise this morning. Ow! Remus had kicked him sharply under the table. Marlene watched them both, sipping her tea with a knowing look. Fortunately, at that moment, the post owls swooped into the great hall, and a large barn owl dropped 2 letters in front of Remus's plate. He snatched them both up eagerly. One was a postcard from Grant, forwarded on via the Potters, with a lewd cartoon on the front, depicting a man on the seashore holding an enormous red stick of Brighton rock against his crotch. The back just read, saw this and thought of you, looking at flats next week. Love. Remus grinned at this and handed it to Sirius, who scowled comically. The second letter was from Professor Ferox, with a list of book recommendations Remus had requested on the history of the magical creatures classification system. They'd been writing back and forth since Christmas. It seemed Ferox was bored with his recuperation, finding himself at a loose end. Sirius watched Remus finish reading the letter. Anything from? He asked, giving a significant look. Remus shook his head. Nothing from his mother. Sirius tried to flash him a cheering smile. Still time, eh? Remus just shrugged. Going to the library, see if I can find any of these before History of Magic. He held up Ferox's list. See you later, girls. He nodded at Mary and Marlene. See you in the hospital wing this evening? Marlene asked, hopefully. Remus remembered it was Tuesday. He hadn't been attending the healing lessons Madame Pumphrey had kindly included him in for some weeks now, too busy memorizing curses. He didn't really want to go this evening, it being a full moon, but he looked at Marlene and felt guilty. Of course, he nodded. See you then. Sirius bounded happily alongside Remus as he made his way to the library, mentally working through his timetable for the day. He only had 3 classes, luckily, but he'd promised to catch up with Christopher at some point, and he wanted to write back to both Grant and Ferox, and he had an arithmancy essay due. Moony, Earth-calling planet Moony. Sirius interrupted his thoughts. We just walked past the library, if that's where you were heading. Oh, bollocks. Remus turned 180 degrees and started back, Sirius still in tow. Care to share? Oh, nothing, just thinking. Not worrying, I hope, about tonight? A bit. They entered the library and had to be quiet as they passed Madame Pince's desk. He'd actually been trying not to think about the coming moon. After all, Dumbledore had said not to. He'd said the Order were dealing with it, and Remus could only hope that that meant Alistair Moody was on the case, which made him feel slightly better. Still, Castor's warning had been ringing in his ears since Saturday, and it was impossible to forget. "I don't think we ought to leave the shack tonight," Remus whispered. "If anything happens—" "It won't. Dumbledore's dealing with it," Sirius replied, leaning against the nearest bookcase casually while Remus looked for the texts he wanted. Remus had to stop himself from tutting. James and Sirius put so much faith in Dumbledore, he often wondered whether he was missing something. But then Remus trusted very few people over the age of 18, with good reason. "I know," he said calmly, "but I'd like you to respect my wishes, if it's all the same to you." "Hey, don't be like that," Sirius chided gently. "Of course we will. Anything for our Moony." Remus found 3 of the books on Ferox's list, which cheered him up a bit. He took them to Madame Pince, then began to tuck them into his bag. "I'll take them," Sirius offered, holding out his hands. "You don't want to be lugging them around all day. I'm going back to the dorm anyway." "Oh, cheers." Remus handed them over. "Are you going to start on that arithmancy essay?" "Not if I can possibly avoid it." Sirius pulled a face. "See you at lunch? You're free this afternoon, aren't you?" Yeah, but I'm supposed to be seeing Christopher. Then there's that essay you're not doing, and healing class. And I really want to write back to Ferox today, if I can. I think he likes getting the post since he's not allowed out much." "Merlin, Remus," Sirius was shaking his head. "You got to be at the shack by 6. "I'm aware," Remus replied offhandedly, adjusting his book bag. It could really do with another mending spell. Unless you held it just right, the seams started splitting. "And are you planning to eat?" Sirius continued. "When have I ever forgotten a meal?" Remus poked his tongue out. "Anyway, I have to run. History. See you at lunch." 1:50 p.m. In spite of his promises, Remus was extremely late for lunch and had missed everyone except Sirius, who had waited back. "Sorry," Remus gasped as he reached the table, a little breathless from running. He sat down, stayed back to talk to Kettleburn, then remembered I'd forgotten my notes in Professor Binns's room. History was a bloody waste, too, all stuff I've covered in the reading. Oh, thank you. Sirius had pushed a plate of sausage and mash across the table to him. Remus dug in, eating and talking as quickly as he could. They only had 10 minutes before lunch was over, and the school choir would want the hall for their weekly practice sessions. Anyway, it worked out nicely in the end. I used the time to write my letter to Ferox and a note for Grant, so at least that's done. What's that? Sirius had slid a stack of parchment across the table now. Remus drained his glass of pumpkin juice and looked down at it. "Arithmancy?" "Your essay," Sirius said casually. "Finished mine, like a good boy, so I thought I'd do yours too." "You what?" Remus did a double take. Sirius was ridiculously good with a quill and had mimicked his own spidery handwriting perfectly. "I don't believe you." "How many times have you done it for Wormy? Or James, for that matter? He's still got a stick up his arse about this morning, by the way. Won't talk to me about it. Anyway, now that's done. And the letters, you're free for the afternoon. Thanks so much, Padfoot. Honestly, this is brilliant. But I did promise to see Christopher, and—" "Nope." Sirius was grinning like the cat who'd got the cream. "Just saw him. Told him you weren't well, so you couldn't see him." "Sirius." "Well, you're not well," Sirius responded innocently. "What with tonight, you ought to be resting." "I'll be fine once I've eaten," Remus replied shortly, eyes on his food, mopping up the last of the gravy with his mashed potato. He'd licked the plate if he was shameless enough. Full moons made him ravenous. When he'd finished, he looked up and found Sirius staring at him, big eyes full of puppyish remorse. "Angry with me?" "No." Remus wiped his mouth with his sleeve and pushed his plate away in time for it to vanish back down to the kitchens. "But you can't reorganize my life like that just to get your own way." "I didn't mean it like that." Sirius sat up, looking shocked. You always have so much on, and it's insane. I mean, it's amazing because you're amazing and you can handle it, but you don't have to." "Okay." Remus frowned, getting up. He wasn't sure exactly what Sirius was saying. He had always tried to keep busy. He liked being busy and useful to people. "And you'd written so many notes for that essay it practically wrote itself." Sirius continued as they left the Great Hall and began to head for Gryffindor Tower. "And we can go and find Christopher if you want. He's probably in the library." "Sirius," Remus sighed fondly. "Go on, I'll post the letters for you, and I'll see you for early dinner." "Sirius!" He checked the coast was clear. Everyone was in lessons, and Peeves wasn't about. An empty corridor was a rare thing at Hogwarts. "Oh, bugger!" Sirius slapped his forehead. "I can't do early dinner. I've got that detention with Filch. Only for an hour, though. I'll be out in time for—" "Sirius!" "What?" He finally stopped talking in time for Remus to catch him unawares with a quick kiss on the lips. "Shut up, you idiot," he smiled. "I'd much rather spend the afternoon with you than studying with Christopher." "Oh," Sirius blushed, looking very pleased. 2:15 p.m. Less than 20 minutes later, and Remus was completely blissed out, lying on his back with the record player at his feet and Sirius's head resting against his good hip. Bowie was singing and strumming his 8-string, and the two boys listening were sharing a spliff Sirius had charmed off a Ravenclaw earlier that week. "Does the wolf get stoned too?" Sirius asked, reaching up for his turn. Remus shook his head, inhaling deeply and passing the joint. "Hungrier, probably," he replied, voice high. Sirius murmured. Remus exhaled and closed his eyes, settling back on the pile of cushions. It was like sinking into warm treacle. He let his thoughts drift. "Can I ask you something?" He mumbled, "Fire away, Moony." "What was Mary on about this morning? About the Hufflepuff Keeper's stamina? I think she was blagging, to be honest with you." "Not that," Remus chuckled. "The bleeding thing, bleeding from her, what did she mean?" Sirius swiveled his head in Remus's lap to look up at him, wearing a bemused frown. "She was talking about, her time of the month." He raised his eyebrows as if Remus was supposed to catch on somehow. "What's that?" Remus frowned back, none the wiser. "Remus, seriously? What?" Girls are different from boys." "Well, I know that." Remus bristled, feeling defensive now. "Okay, so girls get this thing every month." Sirius began to explain. Remus was utterly horrified by the time he'd finished. "That's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard," he said flatly. "It's natural." Sirius shrugged. "I'll get Lily to explain it to you. I probably told it wrong. Bloody hell, you're nearly 18. How did you not know?" "Oh yeah, make fun of the care home kid," Remus tutted. "I grew up in a boys' reformatory. How am I supposed to know anything about girls?" "Explains a lot," Sirius said dryly. Remus flicked his ear sharply. "Ow!" "What's your detention for anyway?" Remus asked, settling back again. Hexed Crouch. "Oh, right. Him and my darling brother were tormenting some second years, but obviously he got out of it because he's a prefect." Sirius muttered darkly. He never said Regulus's name anymore, just my darling brother, in that cruel, overly plummy accent, which Remus thought was probably to make fun of Regulus's poshness. Except, and Remus would never say this out loud, for the first few years Remus had known Sirius, he'd had exactly the same clipped-received enunciation. "Ought to try and ignore them if you can," Remus advised. "I know he bothers you, but it's better to just stay out of his way. School's over soon." "I know," Sirius said, hogging the spliff. Remus reached for it, snatching his wrist. God, he loved Sirius's wrists. The bones were so fine, the veins like blue ribbon under translucent skin. His own fingers wrapped all the way around easily. He held it now and pulled Sirius's hand to his mouth, sucking the end of the joint, then letting him go. Sirius just smirked up at him. The record stopped, and he had to get up to flip it to the B-side. "I suppose I just don't want him to hurt anyone." He sighed, settling back down. "That's not your job." Remus frowned. "Feels like it," Sirius muttered, stretching. "You don't know what he was like when we were kids. He's not, I don't know. I just don't want him to do something he'll regret later on." Remus thought very hard, which was no mean feat after a few lungfuls of Ravenclaw-grown hash. "Tell you something?" he asked. "A secret?" Sirius replied eagerly, getting up to sit beside him. Sort of, but it's about Regulus. You might not want to hear it." Sirius went a bit quiet, a bit more rigid, but he nodded. Go on. Remember the boggart that got me and Chris before Christmas? How could I forget? Sirius replied, a note of jealousy in his voice. Wish I'd been there. Never seen a boggart. Werewolves not exciting enough for you now? Remus raised his eyebrows. Anyway, I checked the map right after Chris went to get someone, and, well, I'm pretty sure it was Regulus who put the boggart there. He and Barty were nearby. Remus craned his neck slightly, so he could see Sirius's face and how he was taking the news. His mouth was a straight line. He looked more tired than angry. He shook his head. Stupid prick, he muttered. It's all her, you know. He's an idiot for wanting to please her, obviously, but it's all her fault anyway. Your mother? Sirius nodded. Remus didn't know what to say. They had agreed long ago they could talk about anything but mothers. And that's the way it had been on Sirius's side anyway. Remus didn't want to go into it now either. Everything was so nice and warm, and if they could just hang on to it a bit longer, then this would be such a good memory, something he would have inside him forever. He reached over and stroked Sirius's cheek, that perfect jawline. He sat up and shifted around to face him. Let's forget about all that shit, he said. It's boring. Sirius kissed him. 4 p.m. Remus walked down alone for dinner at 4, as Sirius left for his detention. It was so early that Remus was the only one there, except for Marlene, who was also attending Madame Pumphrey's healing class. I'm glad you're coming, she beamed at him. Marlene smiled a lot these days. I haven't seen you properly since Christmas. Yeah, sorry, Remus replied, beginning his second helping of lasagna, twice as big as the first. Been so busy with Newt stuff? I really wanted to talk to you about what happened on the train. Remus stared at her, fork halfway to his mouth. With all of the fuss about Castor and the full moon, Remus had been able to avoid talking about their strange meeting with Yasmin and Marlene on the train. He felt guilty again. Obviously, Marlene had been thinking about it a lot. Hang on, Marlene was saying, reaching for her wand. Muffliato, she murmured. The noise in the hall around them seemed to deaden slightly. What was that? He asked, keeping his voice low. Stops people listening in. Marlene explained, Lily taught it to us. Mary uses it to gossip all the time in charms. Wow, Remus nodded appreciatively. So anyway, Marlene leaned forward on her elbows, eyes bright. You and Sirius, does anyone know? Oh. Remus finally set down his knife and fork, though he could have happily kept going. Yeah, actually. James and Peter. Lily, too. Really? Yeah, he nodded, checking that there was definitely nobody listening. Only recently, though. What about you and Yaz? No one, she said firmly. Not even Mary. Least of all her, Marlene said ruefully. Remus decided not to inquire further. He'd had enough revelations concerning Mary for one day. Has it been going on long, you two? He asked. I had no idea. Sorry, Marlene blushed, looking down. I've known I was different, I suppose, for a long time now, and I really wanted to say something to you, especially after the summer, but I don't know. How do you bring it up? Tell me about it, Remus agreed eagerly. Yaz has been my girlfriend since just before Christmas. She's incredible. Marlene was smiling again, and Remus could practically feel the joy radiating from her. He touched her hand gently. I'm really happy for you. Thanks, she squeezed his hand back. But what about you? More to the point, what about Sirius? What about him? I'm just flabbergasted, really. Is he fully queer or more AC/DC? I haven't asked. We don't really talk about that sort of thing. You don't? She gave him an odd, sideways glance. Doesn't it bother you? His history with girls? No. Remus felt himself growing hot under the collar. This was exactly the sort of thing he wanted to avoid discussing with anyone. It's not relevant. Okay, Marlene shrugged, though she looked unconvinced. If it works, I suppose. He didn't respond to that, and eventually the Muffliato spell wore off and they finished eating before making their way to their healing class at 4.30. Marlene was planning to tell Mary, she said, when the time was right. Remus knew that argument well enough and didn't think it was really his place to offer advice. It was nice to know that someone else knew how he felt, at least even just a little bit. The healing class passed very slowly. Remus found that he was still pretty stoned, plus quite full, which made him sleepy. He tried to listen to Madame Pumphrey's lecture on circulatory diagnostic spells, but his mind kept wandering, drifting back to his bed and Sirius. The kindly nurse assumed he was just out of it because the moon was close and didn't chastise him as she usually might. He ought to have felt bad about that, but he was too happy daydreaming to worry too much. 6:30 p.m. Remus hung back in the hospital wing and sat quietly in Madame Pumphrey's office while she tidied a few things away before the pair of them made their journey down to the shack together. There would only be 4 more full moons at Hogwarts after this one, Remus realized. He knew he would miss Poppy Pumphrey more than he could ever tell her. She would always be the first person who had ever tried to make him comfortable, the first person who ever thought they could help. She bid him goodbye and promised to return first thing in the morning, as always. He put on the same brave face he'd used when he was 11 and waved to her cheerily from the bed as she closed the door. Alone, Remus stared at the floor for a bit, trying to recall his afternoon and suppress the growing dread in the pit of his stomach. He got up and paced a bit for something to do. In time, the door creaked open once more, and James poked his head around the corner. He glanced around the room before entering, looking just as awkward as he had that morning. "Hiya, Mooney," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose nervously as he entered. "No Wormtail yet?" "I think he had lines to do for McGonagall," Remus said, sitting on the bed again. "Righto." James nodded. He stood leaning against the wall. They were completely silent for a good 3 minutes. Remus tried not to fidget, but the quiet was pretty unbearable. He and James had never been awkward before. Even after Remus came out, he was the first to swear that nothing had changed. But of course now something really had changed, something which had shifted and skewed the dynamic. James was generally good at rolling with the punches, but it seemed he had a real blind spot when it came to Sirius Black. "Lily wants to be an animagus now," James said suddenly, clearly trying to crack the tension. "Of course she does," Remus smiled fondly. "Bet she masters it in half the time you lot took." "You're not wrong," James laughed appreciatively. But that only hit a dead end, and silence invaded the space between them once more. Remus swallowed and watched James, who was looking at his feet. He had just made up his mind to speak, to make some joke or ask about Quidditch, when James looked up suddenly, catching his eye. "Look, Mooney, I'm really sorry about this morning," he said, all in a rush, as if he'd been holding his breath. Remus blinked. "You're sorry?" "Yeah, I should have realized. You know, you two are, together, going out, whatever. I shouldn't have been so surprised." "It's okay, Prongs," Remus said kindly. "I'm sorry. We've been trying not to rub in your face too much, and I swear nothing was happening this morning. I just sleep there sometimes." "See, that's what I mean. You shouldn't have to sneak around," James burst out. "Really, it's not a problem. You should sleep where you want to sleep." "Oh, okay, thank you." Remus nodded. "I don't want things to be weird," James said helplessly. "Me neither," Remus insisted. "That's the last thing I want. Sirius too. I just wanted to keep a low profile because, well, he's your best friend, and him and me seeing each other doesn't mean—" "I never thought it did," James said hurriedly. He had crossed the room now, his inherent good nature taking over as he sat down next to Remus on the bed. "And you're my best friend too, Remus." Remus looked down at his hands shyly. "Christ, Potter," he grinned. "Why'd you always have to be so perfect?" "Born that way." James shrugged, mirroring Remus's grin. "Come here, Tosser." He pulled him in for a hug. Remus relaxed, finally. All was well. At that moment the door swung open once more, and Sirius sauntered into the room, closely followed by Peter. "Oi!" Sirius barked, pointing at James. "Hands off my man!" Chapter 132, 7th Year. Victims. Howling, whining, scents, animals, magic, mold. He had to get out. Hunt, pack, pack. The big one tried to stop him. The black one tackled him, but he had to get out. He was so hungry, so hungry. Remus, Remus, wake up. His eyes snapped open as Sirius shook him roughly by the shoulders. What? Are you okay? He was lying on his back on the dusty shack floor. He was bleeding, but he didn't know where from. Sirius was bleeding too. Remus tried to sit up and winced as his head rattled and his back creaked. What happened? He gasped, throat raw from howling or screaming. Here, Sirius helped him up and over to the bed. He pulled out a goblet. Remus didn't know where he'd got it, and whispered, Augumenti. Sirius's hands were shaking as water poured from his wand, and he handed it to Remus, who drank greedily, spilling it down his front. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the blood and the fear and the sunrise, but it was taking longer than usual for his human thoughts to come back to him, like waking up still drunk with a hangover to boot. What happened? He asked again, frowning. Are you hurt? It's fine. Sirius shook his head. He looked very pale, not his usual aristocratic alabaster, but sickly, worried, yellowish with sweat. You just nipped me a few times. You kept trying to get out. Did I? Remus grabbed him suddenly, pulling his shirt. Sirius pushed him down, gently, reaching for blankets to cover him with. He shook his head. No, we kept you here. You never left, I promise you. Where are the others? They had to go. Madame Pumphrey'll be here soon. When you turned back, it was different. Harder than normal, I think. You wouldn't wake up properly, so James left me the cloak. I didn't want to leave you here. Remus lay back, his mind racing. He tried to remember, but it was all scrambled up. He only knew one thing for sure. Something really bad happened, he whispered. His own voice was trembling now, and cold dread settled in his stomach like a sickness. Sirius didn't say anything. He just squeezed his hand. He hissed under the cloak as soon as Madame Pumphrey arrived, and she hurried in with a terrible grey look on her own face. He sat up, every muscle screaming at him. Poppy, he rasped. What happened? Please tell me. How are you first? She asked, coming over to feel his forehead. You're running very high. I feel fine, he lied, batting her hand away impatiently. There was an attack, wasn't there? She nodded wordlessly. His heart thumped. Who? How many? I don't know, she said very quietly. He had never heard that voice come out of her before. For a moment she wouldn't even meet his eyes. She had always looked him in the eye. Please, he said again. She shook her head very slightly. There's nothing I can tell you. It'll be in the morning news. I have to see Dumbledore. He's not here. She stood up. Now can you walk? Professor McGonagall says you're to go to your lessons as usual if you're fit enough. We don't want anyone asking where you are. I'll give you something for the pain. They walked through the tunnel in silence, with Sirius behind them, still invisible. Madame Pumphrey dealt with the worst of his scratches, mostly from Padfoot, though fortunately she assumed he'd done them to himself, and told him to carry on about his day. He took the potion she gave him, but his head still throbbed and his body ached. As soon as she had turned a corner, Sirius revealed himself and slid an arm around Remus's back. Why are you pretending you're okay? He hissed, supporting Remus up the stairs back to their dorm. You can barely walk. I'll be fine in a minute, Remus replied, gritting his teeth. She's got enough to worry about. Ugh, fucking stairs. James said he'd send an owl to his dad right away, Sirius said, as they slowly traversed the marble staircase. If anyone knows what's happened, the Potters will. Yeah, Remus nodded, wheezing. Good, but he knew that it was all no good. Whatever had happened, and it had been just as awful as Castor promised. It was the end of any chance of civility for the werewolves. Back in the dorm room, James was still waiting for a reply from his parents. Remus sat down on his bed, heavily, chest heaving, every part of him aching, his skin on fire. You could just bunk off, Sirius said awkwardly, glancing at the others. We do it all the time. Remus shook his head. He hauled himself up, clutching the bed frame. Can't risk it. We've got arithmancy first. Snape's in that. If the papers are full of werewolf attacks and I'm not there, what do you want to bet he'll be the first to start stirring? I'm going for a shower just a minute. He could hear the other three marauders whispering loudly through the bathroom door, but he hadn't the energy to focus on anything except getting through the next 6 hours. He turned on the taps and let the hissing water drown them out. Werewolf attacks. Magical community demands action. Hundreds were affected by a string of brutal werewolf attacks during last night's full moon, which left 15 wizards dead and at least 5 missing, presumed kidnapped. None of the creatures responsible have been identified as yet, and the Aura's office has advised everyone to be on high alert and to consult the published ministry guidelines on identifying and approaching werewolves, which are classified XXX and considered highly dangerous. The interim minister for magic has been criticised for failure to maintain the werewolf register, established by Newt Scamander in 1947. Speaking for the opposition, Abraxas Malfoy released a statement in the early hours of this morning. Last night's attacks are further proof that the ministry is in dire need of reform, and on behalf of the ancient and law-abiding magical families of Great Britain, we demand stricter sanctions on half-humans and other undesirable and potentially dangerous elements. This statement has provoked outrage in what insiders are describing as an increasingly divided ministry. "No names," James muttered darkly. "That's not good." "Protecting the victims' families," Sirius suggested. "Since when has the Daily Prophet cared about that?" Lily hissed venomously. "Since when has the ministry—" "Careful what you say," Peter whispered, his eyes wide. "My cousin who works at the Prophet said they're being sent really strict guidelines on what they can write, about the ministry, the war, anything, and there are spies everywhere checking on them, making sure no one's being too critical." This made everyone go quiet, and Lily looked around nervously, glancing over her shoulder. It didn't matter. Everyone in the Great Hall seemed to be talking about the same thing, huddled in groups over newspapers, whispering amongst themselves. "It's not as if we're disagreeing with what the paper says," Marlene whispered, leaning forward. "I hate Malfoy's politics as much as the next half-blood, but he's right about the failures of the register. The werewolves need to be contained, or stuff like this will happen, Dark Lord or not." "That's ridiculous," Sirius scoffed. "An organized attack like this only happens when there's someone behind it. This would never happen without Voldemort goading them." Everyone winced as he said the name. Remus had noticed that happening more and more as the list of missing grew and people trusted each other less. "They're still dangerous," Marlene replied. "I don't see why we're pretending they aren't. It says right here," she jabbed the black and white print, "classified KEX. I know it's unfortunate for them. They might have been perfectly normal otherwise, but facts are facts." No one said anything to that, Remus doing his best to ignore all of them. He was busy writing a letter to Professor Ferox, who was the only person he could think of who had been in potential danger last night. Livia knew him. He had attacked her once, and Remus thought she seemed like the sort of person to hold a grudge. Besides, writing gave him something to distract himself from how dreadful he felt, aching and shivery all over. He knew he looked awful too, and thought it best to keep his head down. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Lily whispered to him on their way out of the hall. "Miles just sees everything as black and white. Don't take it personally." "I don't," Remus replied tiredly. "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." Still, he was dreading care of magical creatures later that morning, when he'd have to sit next to Marlene. He'd cast a glamour to cover up his newer scars and was sipping on a pepper-up potion, as if it was keeping him alive, but he couldn't hide the fact that he was utterly exhausted. Not to mention the bone-crushing guilt he felt over the attacks. He'd known they were going to happen. He'd told Dumbledore, but it hadn't been enough. He ought to have done more. Arithmancy wasn't too bad. He had Sirius, James and Lily in that, and they formed a protective huddle around him, taking their seats at the back of the class. The exercises were almost impossible to do. Remus found his mind oddly fractured, unable to hold down a thought for very long. James and Sirius fell into their usual clownish mischief, creating a satisfactory distraction any time the teacher glanced up at Remus. He was so grateful, especially as they had both been up all night too. Afterwards, Sirius walked him to care of magical creatures, as he had a free hour, and Remus hadn't the energy to refuse. The hallways were too busy for him to risk leaning on the other boy for support, so they just went slowly. "Just bunk off," Sirius pleaded, watching him struggle down the third flight of stairs. "You've shown your face. Snivelus has seen you." Remus just shook his head, carrying on doggedly. As he reached the bottom, a couple of third-year boys rushed past, shouting at each other and laughing. One of them bumped into Remus with his bag, which would have been nothing on a good day, but at that moment was exactly the wrong thing, and knocked Remus sideways into the banister. He bit his lip as the left side of his body hit the hard stone, but couldn't help letting out a gasp of pain. "Certis Corpius!" Sirius yelled, pulling his wand out and firing the hex at all three boys. They yelped as the marble staircases turned to quicksand beneath them and began to swallow them up. Sirius only stopped it when their legs were dangling through the bottom and they were both trapped halfway. "Watch where you're going," he said menacingly before helping Remus down the last few steps. No one intervened. No one ever did when it was Sirius, and Remus was too focused on getting to his lesson on time. "Promise me you'll go back and free them," he asked as they neared the classroom. "I don't need you getting a detention on top of everything." "If someone else hasn't found them," Sirius shrugged. "I only taught them a lesson. Any prefect would have done the same." Remus usually would have found that funny, but he felt as though he was wading through quicksand too, his limbs heavy and slow, everything around him foggy and blurred. "Right," Sirius was saying. "I'll be back here in an hour to get you." "I don't need collecting. I'm not a child," Remus muttered. "No," Sirius squeezed his hand very quickly. "You're my Moony." He made a mental note to save that up for later, when he was alone and could bask in the thought of being Sirius's anything. Just now he hated himself too much to allow anyone to be kind. Care of magical creatures was worse than he could have imagined. His temperature was running even higher from the exertion, and he had to keep wiping sweat from his eyes, hair sticking to his forehead. Despite breakfast having been only an hour earlier, his stomach felt like an empty cavern, growling intermittently. His head ached and his vision swam, but he sat bolt upright, staring fixedly at the blackboard. They were supposed to be doing dragons, identifying the various species and their individual properties. Kettleburn began the lesson as he always did, with a terrifying and usually harrowing story of an encounter he'd had with whichever creature they were discussing. Today was no different, and the battle-scarred professor was in his element today. He had lost 2 limbs to dragons. Despite this animated tale, only half of the class was actually paying attention. You could tell by the look of faint horror on their faces as they scribbled down notes. The other half, Marlene and Mary included, was busy reading the chapter in their textbooks which concerned werewolves. "There's something a bit sexy about the whole beast-man thing, though," Mary whispered across Remus, who began to feel light-headed. "Mary," Marlene hissed angrily, "that's completely insensitive. People died." "I'm just saying." "No. You wouldn't think that anyway if you met a real one. I spoke to Sian Bolsh over the summer. She left last year for healer training, and she's been shadowing a healer on the lycanthropy ward at St. Mungo's. They have awful hygiene, most of them, because they can't live near normal wizards, and they basically live off handouts and charity." "Well, then I feel sorry for them," Mary snapped back. "That sounds horrible. Wizards are so heartless." "You're being deliberately dense. They're not safe." "Excuse me, Professor Kettleburn." The whole class turned to see McGonagall standing in the doorway. Remus's stomach dropped. Had she come for him? Had the ministry finally come for him? The head of Gryffindor House looked very grave and was holding a letter in her hand, but she did not look at Remus. "I am sorry to interrupt. Marlene McKinnon, may I speak to you?" Marlene frowned and stood up, setting her quill back into the inkwell. She threw a confused glance back at Mary and Remus before following Professor McGonagall out of the room. The door closed, and everyone stared at it in silence. "She can't be in trouble," Mary whispered to Remus. "She's too goody-goody." Remus mumbled something, but his hunger had turned into queasiness, and he didn't want to open his mouth. He wished he could take off his cloak. The room was so stuffy and hot. He was getting uncomfortably damp under his armpits and across his back. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Mary asked, her face concerned. "You look like you're going to puke. Is it Kettleburn's horrid stories?" Remus nodded very slightly, shooting pains firsting up his neck as he did so. He rested his forehead in his hands, hoping he just looked like he was really interested in his notes. There was no room for Mary to probe him any more, though. A horrible shriek sounded outside the classroom, followed by a chilling moan of absolute despair. Mary was on her feet at once and flew out of the room to see her friend. Remus caught only a glimpse as the door swung open and shut of Marlene on her knees, sobbing, and McGonagall bent over her, patting her shoulders. Even Kettleburn was rendered mute for a few minutes before regaining his composure and clearing his throat. "We're living in difficult times," he said, quite out of character. "I urge you all to be kind to each other, especially as you prepare to leave Hogwarts." The lesson continued after that, much subdued, and it took all of Remus's concentration to stay conscious in his seat now that he was alone on his desk. About 15 minutes before the class was due to end, there was a second knock at the door. "Enter," Kettleburn barked. The door opened and Lily walked in. "Good morning, Professor. I've just come to collect Marlene's things for her." Kettleburn nodded and gestured at Marlene's desk, where her work was still spread out, her book bag hanging off the back of her chair. Lily went over and quickly started gathering things together. She took one look at Remus and raised her head. "Sorry, Professor. Could I ask Remus to come with me? I didn't realize Mary left all of her bits too." Of course," Kettleburn nodded distractedly, labeling a diagram of a dragon's lair on the board. "Chapters 18 to 25 for next lesson, please, Mr. Lupin." "Yes, sir," Remus croaked, picking up Mary's bag. Thank God it wasn't heavy, and thank God for Lily Evans. As soon as they were outside in the corridor, Remus leaned heavily against the wall and closed his eyes. "Oh, Remus," Lily said anxiously, raising a cool hand to his forehead. "You look dreadful." "I'm fine," he mumbled uselessly, eyes still shut. "Just give me a second. Is Marlene?" "She's gone home." Lily lowered her voice, though they were quite alone. "Her brother Danny was attacked last night. St. Mungo's started realizing names." Remus's head swam. He opened his eyes only to see black spots and closed them again in case he fainted. "Is he? He's alive, but it doesn't sound very good." The guilt was overwhelming, roaring in Remus's ears. How would he ever look Marlene in the eye again? "Come on." Lily took his arm and draped it over her shoulders. She fitted very snugly, but he didn't dare lean on her too much. "I'm taking you to the tower. You're in no state for school. I'll say you're helping me pack for Marlene. Someone ought to tell." He was about to say Yasmin, but realized that it was still a secret. "Madam Pumphrey." He finished lamely. "Marlene's going to miss healing lessons." "I'm sure she already knows," Lily replied briskly. "Come along now." She was a lot harder to refuse than Sirius. Chapter 1. 133. 7th year, Sunday afternoon. Sunday, the 29th of January, 1978. "Moony." "It's after midday." "So? Thought you might fancy getting up." "No, thanks. Can I come in?" "No." "Okay, then." Sirius began to walk away, and Remus's stomach flipped. "I'm sorry," he said, loud enough for Sirius to hear and stop. Remus finally crawled out of the covers. "I do want you here. I just don't know what to say." He could hear Sirius fidgeting, his hands in his pockets, then running through his hair. Finally, "We don't have to talk?" Remus sighed. He was a mess. He hadn't washed properly since Wednesday, and had only got out of bed to use the bathroom. The other boys had been feeding him by passing food through the crack in his curtains, and if they hadn't, Remus wasn't sure if he'd have eaten at all. He was in the worst state he'd ever been in, but he missed Sirius. Okay then." The curtains parted and Remus scowled against the bright daylight, but Sirius crawled in quickly, closing them again. He looked at Remus, but he didn't look too hard before shuffling down next to him and enveloping him in his arms. "Thanks," he breathed against Remus's hair, "for letting me in. Reckon I must stink." Sirius inhaled deeply, tickling Remus's forehead and making him squirm. "Nope, just smell like Mooney." "Gareth mutt." Remus wriggled away from him. "Feel like getting up soon. Everyone's worried. And they're looking at me now, like I know what to do because everyone knows about us, which is weird and quite a lot of pressure, really." Remus chuckled, and it felt strange but good. Still, he had a melancholic episode to maintain. "I still don't feel like getting up." "Okay, then you need to let me hide here with you, because I'm not going back out there." "Sirius?" "Remus." Sirius frowned at him, exaggerating his eyebrows to look stupid. "Stop it!" Remus folded his arms, aware he was starting to sound like a sulky child. "I will not." Sirius poked him in the ribs. "Come on, I know you're feeling like shit about everything, but did you ever consider that it's not for you to hog all of the misery like this? That maybe if you talk to your friends it might not all seem quite so bleak?" Remus frowned up at him, arms still crossed. "Maybe that works for you. Are you saying this is working for you?" Remus pressed his lips together. They stared each other out for a minute. Remus began to think he'd quite like to fight Sirius right now, like they did on full moons, just because it was a fun way to expel energy. Then he noticed something. He sniffed the air. "Are you bleeding? I can smell blood." "Probably you, from the moon." "No, I've healed already. I never have open wounds longer than a day." "Bloody hell," Sirius laughed lightly. "How is it possible for you to get any cooler?" "And it's your blood, I can tell." "There you go again. You're basically a superhero." "Sirius?" Okay, he sat up, running his hands through his hair. "You swiped at me a few times over the moon. I told you that. We did it to each other. And you can't turn me when I'm a dog. We've tested that enough times." "But you're still bleeding. It was almost a week ago. You need to go to Madame Pumphrey." "Oh yeah, and say my werewolf boyfriend scratched me while I was in dog form as an illegal animagus." "Jesus," Remus groaned, hauling himself up and out of bed, grabbing Sirius by the wrist and pulling him along. "Where are we going?" "I need better light." He yanked open the bathroom door and slammed down the lid of the toilet. "Sit," he instructed. Sirius complied, half smiling. Remus opened the little mirror cabinet above the sink, digging out murtlap essence and disinfectant and gauze and cotton balls. He had found over years of trial and error that a combination of magical and muggle things worked best, as with almost everything else. He pulled his wand out of his pajama bottoms and stood in front of Sirius. "Okay, show me." Sirius dropped his head, no longer enjoying Remus's newfound motivation. He sighed heavily and lifted his shirt, saying, "It's not that bad." It wasn't as bad as Remus had feared, but it still made his stomach clench when he saw 3 dark red stripes across Sirius's ribs. They were starting to heal, but he knew he could fix it fairly easily. He took a deep breath, met Sirius's eye, and then reached for the disinfectant, then his wand. Remus was pretty good at healing cuts now, and the scab and the redness were gone in an instant. Now they were white stripes. "I'm so sorry," he said mournfully. "It was a magical wound. You'll have a scar there for the rest of your life now." Sirius looked down at the mark, then up again. "That's fine, Remus," he said quietly. So Remus rejoined the group at Sirius's goading, and they were all kind enough to pretend he had merely been unwell and not avoiding them. The news over the past few days had been particularly grim. First, the Prophet had published a list of the dead and their photographs. Then they had published a list of those presumed bitten, along with their photographs, which had provoked outcry among some of the more liberal commentators and ignited a debate on mandatory registration for all werewolves. Greyback's name had not been mentioned, nor any other werewolf that Remus was aware of. It was as if the horrific crime simply happened one night, and the assailants had vanished into thin air. No one had heard from Marlene either, though Danny McKinnon was one of those named in the papers. He'd been given a full 4 inches of text by virtue of his celebrity as beater for the Chudley Cannons. The team's manager was interviewed and quoted, saying that while he had not yet been briefed on the details, Danny's condition, the Cannons operated a zero-tolerance policy to half-breeds and dangerous creatures and would deal with any allegations of infection accordingly. James vowed that he would never see a Chudley Cannons game again, but Remus mostly felt sorry for Danny. They tried to put all of this misery behind them and went down for Sunday lunch. And thank goodness, it was generally Remus's favourite meal of the week, and he'd have been even more blue if he'd missed it. Then spent the rest of the evening cosied up in the common room in front of the fire. Remus even acquiesced to a chess game with Peter, who was thrilled. "You know what we ought to start getting serious about," Sirius mused, sorting through his record collection. "Newt?" Remus asked, hopefully, as Peter captured his knight. "Job applications," Lily said from the armchair, where she sat in James's lap, reading a magazine. "The Quidditch Cup," James suggested. "For goodness sake," Sirius tuyuted. "I'm ashamed to call you all marauders." "What?" All three of them frowned, offended. Peter chuckled. "He's talking about the big prank on Slytherin. You know, we started planning it before Christmas." "Wormy boy, you are without a doubt my very favourite person." Sirius grinned broadly. Peter snorted, "Bugger off," and promptly captured Remus's queen. "Ugh, I don't know why I bother. Haven't beaten you since I was 13. Remus sighed, leaning back on the rug on his elbows. He looked up at Sirius. "Well then, got a plan?" "Maybe. Whatever we do, I think we should focus the attack on the dungeons." "Let's not throw around words like attack," Lily said hurriedly. "This is just a practical joke, right? In the wholesome spirit of harmless house rivalry?" "If you like," Sirius shrugged, half ignoring the interjection. "Anyway, Moony, I thought your study group was in on this. What's the point in you having all these minions if you can't make them work for you?" "Oh my God, for the last time, they are not my minions." Remus rolled his eyes. "Anyway, we've not had a proper study group yet this term. I've been ever so slightly busy." "Well, as none of us are scheduled to be in mortal peril for the next month or so," Sirius replied, "I think we ought to get cracking. Everyone could do with a laugh, eh? Assemble the troops, we'll meet sometime next week." "As long as it doesn't clash with Quidditch," James yawned. "I'm there." "Right, I'm off to bed. Transfiguration first thing." The others all glanced up at the clock, or began to yawn themselves, and agreed to follow suit. The common room was clearing out now anyway, and they were some of the last to leave. Remus had just got his pyjamas on and brushed his teeth when he remembered that he'd left his book downstairs. While that didn't usually matter, this particular book was Morris by E.M. Forster, and though the cover was nondescript, he was a bit concerned that if someone picked it up and read the blurb, there would be raised eyebrows. Sighing, he left the bathroom and hurried downstairs, muttering, "Getting my book." To Sirius, who was next in the queue. He had just grabbed the book and was about to head back up when he heard the portrait hole slide open. He turned to see Mary enter. She was wearing a short, spangly silver dress, and she tripped on her way in, but caught herself and giggled. "All right?" he called to her. She looked up, squinting a bit in the dim light. "Hiya, sexy," she grinned, wandering in a bit unsteady on her feet. Might have been the 4-inch heels she was wearing. Or it might have been the witch's brew Remus could smell wafting off her. "Hello? Been somewhere?" He walked back towards the couches, wanting to make sure she was all right before leaving. "Pfft!" She waved a hand, collapsing into the nearest armchair, spreading her legs out. Her short dress rode up her thighs, but she didn't seem bothered. "Just a few drinks in the Ravenclaw common room. Thought you were seeing a Hufflepuff." He was there." She exhaled, smiling, tilted her head back and closed her eyes. The lids were painted gold, finely rimmed with kohl. She looked like an Egyptian queen in a party frock. "But a lot of people were there, I suppose." She sounded sad. Remus sat down in the armchair opposite her, clutching the book in his lap. "Are you okay, Mary?" "Oh, fine." She opened her eyes slowly and smiled at him. She wasn't that drunk, he realized, but she looked tired and deeply unhappy. "Just stuff on my mind, boys being wankers. Poor Marlene." "Have you heard from her?" Mary shook her head, then sat up, blinking. Haven't got a fag, have you, sweetheart? I don't usually, but I just really fancy one. Yeah? Remus reached in his pockets for his matchbox, where he kept the cigarettes he had rolled himself. He slid it open. Normal or fun? Ooh, fun, please, she purred, reaching over. Might help me sleep. About Marlene, Remus said, lighting his own. I just had a thought, you know her friend Yaz? Have you seen her about? I wasn't sure if anyone told her. I did, Mary said, exhaling, watching Remus through the smoke beneath her heavy golden eyelids. I told her. Oh, Remus blinked, surprised. That's good, then. I thought she had better know, Mary mused, pulling a strand of her hair and winding it coyly around her little finger. Didn't want her to think Miles had gone cold on her. Remus took a quick, sharp puff on his cigarette, frowning very slightly. What do you mean? Mary laughed, arching back in the chair, showing her pearly white teeth. She let the curl of hair spring back into place like a corkscrew. Oh, come on, Remus. She shook her head. I know. She told you. No, Mary conceded, settling back down with a sigh. But I'm not thick, despite rumours to the contrary. At least, I know what romance looks like. She arched her eyebrow. I'm not as dense as James, for example. How long did he take to figure it out? He doesn't know about Marlene, Remus replied. They must keep it quiet during Quidditch stuff. I'm not talking about Marlene now. I'm talking about you. Me? He's a good kisser, isn't he? She winked at him. But then you were too, I seem to remember. How? I've suspected for a little while now. Just little things, all the time you spend together. His being single for more than 5 minutes. I wasn't 100% sure, but you've just confirmed it for me. Bugger. She laughed again, a friendly, trilling sound. Silly boy. She smiled affectionately, playing with her hair again as she smoked. She looked at him again, her eyes more focused. When she spoke, her voice was more serious than normal. It's fine if you want to keep it quiet. I was going to wait to see if you told me yourself, like I'm doing with Miles, but I just wanted to let you know. I know I've got this reputation for being a bit of a big mouth, but I can keep a secret, okay? Especially for my friends, and if... She bit her lip. If there's anything else you're keeping secret, Remus, then you can trust me, okay? It doesn't change anything. This was almost too many revelations for one evening. Remus sucked hard on his cigarette and half wished he'd opted for a spliff too. What are you saying? He asked very carefully. Do you think you know something else? Remus. She sat up. The scars? Being ill every full moon? We do the same care of magical creatures class. You can't tell anyone, Remus said, his voice very low, even though they were completely alone. Please, Mary. Me and Sirius, that's one thing, but this... I could get kicked out of school. I could get arrested. Hey, Mary stood up quickly and came over to sit on the arm of the chair. I'm not going to tell. That's what I'm trying to explain. She wound an arm around his shoulder. Makes no difference to me, I swear. Really? Honestly. She kissed his cheek and gave him a squeeze. So don't take what happened to Marlene's brother so hard, eh? It was nothing to do with you. She'd never forgive me if she knew, Remus said sadly. Mary handed him what was left of the joint, and he puffed on it gratefully. Don't worry about that, she said flippantly. She'll come around. She knows who you really are. And maybe you could help. You could write to Danny, even. I bet he could do with a friend. Remus was about to say that while it was a really nice idea, it was almost impossible, considering the fact that he was unregistered, and it would be a bad idea to draw attention to himself. Moony, where are you? Sirius's plaintive voice came clattering down the stairs. I can smell the pot all the way from here. You're not being subtle. Oh, hiya, MacDonald! Black, Mary nodded, still perched on the arm of Remus's chair. Sorry, I'm trying to seduce your boyfriend. Oh, yeah, I'd like to see you... Wait, my what? She just poked out her tongue at him. He looked at Remus. Are we just telling everyone now? Oi! Mary hopped off the seat. I'm not everyone. Arrogant tosser. Don't forget I had you both first. Remus couldn't help laughing at the look on Sirius's face and got out of the chair, sheepishly, still clutching Maurice. "Sorry, I'll come up now. We were just chatting." He looked back at Mary. "Will you be okay?" "Fine," she nodded, smiling. "I'm off to bed too. Night, lads?" "Good night." Back upstairs in the warm glow of their dorm room, Peter was already snoring softly behind his curtains, and James was sitting cross-legged on his bed, flipping through his Quidditch notebook. "Thought we'd lost you, Moony," he whispered cheerily as the two boys entered. "Bumped into Mary. She's been at some party with the Ravenclaws." "See, this is what happens when you get stuck with the head boy and the head girl in your house," Sirius sighed, leaning back on his own bed. "All the fun happens elsewhere." "Oh, stop whinging," James grinned, closing his book. "We'll have more parties and you know it. Now go to bed like a good boy." "Fine," Sirius yawned, falling backwards dramatically so that he disappeared through the heavy velvet hangings. "Good night, then," Remus started, making for his own bed, but Sirius's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Moony," he whispered softly from the shadows behind the veil. Remus bit his lip and glanced over at James, who looked away, awkwardly, and began to draw his own bed curtains across. "Oh, well. Fuck it." Okay," Remus let Sirius pull him inside. Chapter 134, 7th year, Valentine's Day, 1978. Monday the 13th of February, 1978. "You know," Lily yawned, "other boyfriends might take the night before Valentine's Day to plan something nice for their girlfriends rather than an assault on other students." "Thought we were calling it a practical joke, Evans," Sirius winked. "Anyway, how do you know what other boys are doing? We're the only boys you know, and we're doing this." "Touché." Lily poked her tongue out at him from where she sat cross-legged on James's bed. "And," James said, sitting on the floor beside Remus, folding envelopes as fast as Remus could stuff them, "how do you know I haven't already planned something nice?" "When do you have the time?" She shrugged. "Whenever you're not with me, you're playing Quidditch." "I can multitask," he said haughtily, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Remus gave James a sideways glance. He couldn't account for any of James's free time either, but it was best never to underestimate James Potter. "How about you, Pete?" Mary asked, sitting on James's other side, neatly stacking the envelopes he handed her and ticking names off the list. "Big plans for tomorrow?" "Nope," Peter replied glumly. He was lying on his stomach on his bed, frantically completing the charms notes due for the next day. He'd dropped a few hints to Remus about copying them, but Remus had pretended not to understand, and eventually poor Wormtail had dropped it and just resigned himself to doing a poor job. "What about Dorcas?" Mary pressed. "Dumped me." "Oh, poor love," she cooed. "At least I won't be the only single one." "Really?" Pete looked up hopefully. "Yep, dumped that stupid Hufflepuff." Mary nodded, bent over her work. "Oh, well, if you fancied dinner, maybe—" Peter started. Mary shook her head. "Oh, no, sorry, Pete. I'm triple booked as it is. It'll be a miracle if none of them bump into each other." "Oh." Peter returned to his homework, looking even more depressed than before. Lily stifled a giggle, but Mary seemed oblivious. "Cheer up, Pete. We still love you," Remus offered, stuffing his very last envelope and handing it to James. "Me and Padfoot'll have dinner with you." "So basically exactly the same as every other night of the year," Sirius teased. "You two not doing anything then?" Mary asked casually. It felt like a loaded question all the same, and Remus found it hard to ignore the glances his friends were now shooting at each other. He looked up at Sirius and said very firmly, "Don't even think about it." Sirius's face cracked into a smile. "I think Valentine's Day is Moony's idea of hell." "Exactly," Remus nodded solemnly. "Let the girls have flowers and hearts. He had plenty else going on, thank you very much." "Ah, I think that's a shame," Mary said, crossing the last name off her list and stretching her legs out on the rug, lying back on her elbows. "Valentine's Day can be nice if you do it right." Remus smirked at her. Doing it right to Mary meant receiving votive offerings from her various acolytes, a fantasy in which she was Aphrodite and all would pay homage. "Nope, not interested," he said, stretching his own stiff legs. "Just a normal day." "Sirius likes it," Mary said slyly. "He was always dead romantic." "When we weren't fighting," Sirius interjected. Remus looked at him and realized he had never actually considered whether or not the other boy was interested in celebrating the day. He'd just assumed they were on the same page. "Anyway, that was different," Peter mused, sucking the nib of his quill and getting ink on his lip. "What was?" Mary asked. "When Padfoot was going out with you," Peter replied. "Obviously he did all the mushy stuff then." "Obviously?" Lily spoke up. Remus cringed. He could see where this was going. The redhead had her hackles up. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it always ended in a scolding. "What do you mean, Peter?" Peter saw it coming too, but bless him, he tried to explain himself. "I wasn't being nasty," he said. "It's just, well, it's not the same thing, is it?" "Yes, it is," Mary frowned. James was clearly annoyed too. Remus sighed inwardly. He looked up at Sirius, who shrugged at him. Remus held out his hand, and Sirius hopped off the bed to take it, pulling Remus to his feet. Remus cleared his throat. "If you have all finished discussing our relationship amongst yourselves?" They all looked up sheepishly. "Sorry, Mooney. Sorry, Remus. Let's move on, shall we?" Remus raised an eyebrow and leaned against his bedpost with his hands in his pockets. He nodded at the pile of sealed envelopes. "We need to pass those around tomorrow as soon as. I think probably best to do it at breakfast, so it gets mixed in with the regular post and doesn't look suspicious." This was met with a murmur of general agreement. "Don't forget, the ink only becomes legible when the right person gives their name," Remus continued. He went over to his bedside table for his matchbox of cigarettes and slid one out. "That was such a good idea. I can't believe you did it so quickly," Mary said. She didn't know that the spell they'd used was exactly the same as the one on the Marauder's map, and they weren't going to tell her. "You are in the presence of greatness, MacDonald," Sirius said, taking Remus's cigarette the second he'd lit it. Remus sighed and pulled out another. "At least open a window if you have to smoke in here," James sighed. "We have to smoke in here," Sirius said, flicking his wand at the windows so that they flung wide open, "because our poxy head boy banned smoking in the common room." "All the prefects voted on that, actually," Lily said wryly. "See, Mooney," Sirius nudged him with his hip. "This is why you should have stayed a prefect. You could have been the voice of dissent." "Truly tragic." Remus exhaled smoke. "Right, I'm off to bed then," Mary said, getting up, lifting the pile of invitations and setting them down on James's trunk. "I'm looking forward to this. Be nice to have something else to think about." "I'll come with you," Lily said, getting up too. "Shall I walk you back?" James leapt to his feet. Both girls giggled, as if he had said something charming rather than ridiculous. "I'll keep her safe on the arduous journey across the common room, Potter," Mary teased. Still, Lily and James spent the next 5 minutes bidding each other goodbye, which involved a lot of snogging. When Mary finally managed to drag her friend away, Lily was pink and grinning. "Love you," she called on her way down the stairs. "Love you too," James called back. Sirius began to make sick noises, which made Peter start laughing, but Remus just watched James's dopey expression. He hadn't heard them say, "I love you," before. He didn't think he'd ever heard anyone say it, actually. Not anyone he cared about, at least. He'd seen it written down, in books and in the letter from Hope. But neither of those things had felt as tangible as this. How long had they been saying that? As long as they'd been feeling it. Was it hard to say the first time? Remus thought it must be, like casting a Patronus. He finished his cigarette in a contemplative mood while the others moved around him, finishing homework and changing for bed. He supposed he could ask Sirius about the whole love thing, but he wasn't sure he wanted to open that can of worms. They were happy as they were, weren't they? It was just getting comfortable, now that their friends knew. Plus, after 2 years of pining and almost a year of secrecy, Remus wanted to just enjoy what they had, without all of that prescriptive stuff hanging over them. Remus knew from experience that it was best to resist the temptation to pick things like that apart, especially something as precious and hard-won as he and Sirius had. The problem was, once you started, you might never remember how it worked in the first place. He brushed his teeth, still thinking, and wandered towards Sirius's bed to sit and wait for him. "Finished!" Peter cried, raising his quill with a flourish. "Finally! Well done, Pete." James yawned, climbing into bed. "I didn't get to help you lot, though," Peter said, looking at the pile of envelopes wistfully. "That's okay, this is only preliminary work," Remus offered. "The real planning starts on Wednesday." "Exactly," James nodded encouragingly. "Anyway, don't feel bad. Padfoot didn't help either." "Oi!" Sirius came out of the bathroom at that moment. "I wrote the damn things. Where would you lot be without my beautiful penmanship? And I don't recall Mrs. Prongs doing anything either." He had taken to calling Lily this in private. He wouldn't dare to her face, with the full knowledge that it annoyed James. The messy-haired boy just rolled over in bed, flicking his middle finger in Sirius's direction. Sirius chuckled and got into his own bed. Remus got in too, still deep in thought. "Night, lads," Sirius called, drawing the curtains shut. "Night," Peter and James echoed back. In the dark, Sirius held Remus's hand, and they smiled at each other sleepily. "You're very quiet," Sirius whispered. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Remus whispered back. "Just thinking, prank stuff." "Good." "Sirius?" "Remus, you know Valentine's Day?" "Heard of it." "Did you want to, what Mary said?" "I knew that would get you wound up. I could practically see your brain start to overheat." "Piss off." Remus kicked his shin. "I'm just asking." "Mary loved all that stuff. Presents and flowers and cards and shit. I liked doing it for her because it made her happy. You'd hate it, so I won't." "It's just so public," Remus said. I know. Don't worry about it." "Okay." "Remus." "What?" "Stop worrying. Fine, I believe you." "Anyway, it's not even a real thing," Sirius said thoughtfully. "Valentine's Day. I looked it up." "It's real to muggles, isn't it?" Remus frowned. He couldn't say he'd given it much thought. "There was a bloke called Valentine, but there's nothing especially romantic about it. But I did find out some other stuff about the Romans." "Why can't you apply this thirst for knowledge to your actual schoolwork?" Don't be so boring. Anyway, have you heard of the Lupercalia?" Remus felt a sinking feeling in his stomach and let go of Sirius's hand. "I don't want to talk about wolf stuff right now." "You have heard of it?" Sirius sounded pleased. "No, I just know the Latin for wolf because it's my bloody name." "Oh, right. It's not what you think. It's a festival." "Okay. And it's really cool. There are blood sacrifices and running around naked and—" "I'm going to sleep, but you like history." "Shut up, Padfoot. He wants to go to sleep," James shouted from across the room. "And so do I." "Yeah," Peter echoed. "Mind your own business," Sirius shouted back. "Sonoro quietes," Remus muttered, creating a dry bubble of silence inside the bed. He still whispered when he spoke, though, because it was weird to talk in a normal volume in the dark. "I said I didn't want to talk about wolf stuff, God." "I was only trying to make you feel better about Valentine's Day." "I didn't feel badly about it in the first place." "Okay, sorry, I misread you." Sirius was whispering too, but loudly, obviously annoyed. "You were all quiet about it, and I wanted to cheer you up. I thought you were jealous of Lily and James." "Jealous? That's the wrong word. You were just... I saw you watching them, kissing and stuff, and being all mushy. And I know you hate public displays of affection, but I dunno. It's not like we have a choice either way." Remus blinked in the dark, rolling back over to see Sirius's face. "It bothers you, doesn't it?" It had to, because it had never bothered Remus before. Sudden, he realized what it had all been about. "A bit, maybe," Sirius replied honestly. Remus fumbled under the duvet for his hand again. Tuesday, the 14th of February, 1978. The next morning, James and Sirius were nowhere to be found. Remus presumed they had left early for Quidditch practice. It was a bright, sunny day, despite a chill in the air. After a few minutes of deep thought, Remus rifled in his bedside drawer for his very last chocolate frog and bunged it in his pocket before heading downstairs. The rest of the Gryffindors awoke to find that in the night the house elves had decorated their common room with garlands of red and pink paper hearts. something which seemed to divide all of the students. "It's hardly appropriate in a school," Christopher grumbled, meeting Remus and Mary on their way out of the portrait hole. "Oh, I think it's lovely," Mary sighed cheerily. She was subtly dressed for the occasion, wearing a red ribbon in her hair and red enamel studs in each earlobe. Christopher shook his head grimly at her. If it were a proper holiday, like Christmas or Easter or something. "But why do wizards celebrate those things?" Remus cut in thoughtfully as they progressed towards the dining hall. Every corridor was also decked out in pink and red crepe paper, and there seemed to be music coming from somewhere. "None of the purebloods I've met are Christians, or even know anything about Jesus or the Easter Bunny, or—" "The Easter what?" Christopher was staring at him as if he was mad. "Don't bother, Remus," Mary laughed. "Lily and I tried back in first year. We're not supposed to ask." Christopher's mood did not improve as they entered the great hall, which was bathed in a rosy pink glow by a collection of candles floating inside red glass lanterns. Fresh flowers had been placed in vases on every table, and pink envelopes flew back and forth over the heads of the students, Valentine's cards looking for their recipient. "For goodness sake," Christopher muttered, taking his seat and pouring himself a very black coffee. "It's only one day," Remus said, lifting the teapot, which was also pink. No sooner had they sat down than a pile of pink envelopes fluttered into Mary's lap, making her squeal with delight. Remus grinned too. He pulled out his own envelopes and whispered an incantation, tossing them into the air so that they mingled with the others flying above them. "Here you go, Chris." Remus tossed one across the table. "It's not a Valentine, promise." "Oh, what is it?" Christopher held the blank envelope warily. "An invitation," Remus winked. "Give it your name, but don't share it, okay?" Okay. "Good morning." Lily appeared, looking cheerful as usual, clutching a book on advanced potions. "Anyone seen Potter?" "Quidditch pitch?" Remus raised his head. "Nope," Lily shrugged. "I thought so too, but Ravenclaw booked it this morning." "He and Padfoot were gone when I woke up," Remus said. "That's exactly what I was afraid of," Lily replied, taking her seat. No sooner than she had sugared her porridge than a loud pop echoed over their heads, and everyone looked up. Those students who hadn't immediately dived for cover beneath their breakfast tables began oohing and ahhing as a rather spectacular fireworks display began over their heads. The bursts of colour took the form of gigantic, glittering love hearts, and the embers which rained down turned out to be pink and white flower heads. "Lilies," Mary said gleefully, as one settled on her pile of cards. "Oh no," Christopher wailed. "I'm allergic." He sneezed before aiming his wand upwards and gasping, "Protego!" to defend himself against the fluttering blooms. "I don't believe this." Lily was blushing harder than Remus had ever seen her. He grinned. "You were asking for it, I'm afraid." "I'd have been happy with a card," she hissed as the final fireworks died out and the last of the lilies sailed to the floor like great pink snowflakes, filling the room with their lovely scent. "Oh, shut up, Evans," Mary tutted. "It's bloody gorgeous of him." "Cheers, MacDonald." James appeared at Lily's shoulder with Sirius. "You utter idiot." Lily stood up and wound her arms around James's neck, kissing him. Remus wasn't watching this display, though. He was watching Sirius, who flicked his wand behind James's back. The flowers which had gathered on the table, those which Chris had not tried to clear anyway, began to move again and gathered together in front of Lily's plate. With another soft little pop, the pile had transformed into a large box, emblazoned with even more lilies. "What's that?" Lily turned, leaning over to get a closer look. "Open it and see." James was grinning ear to ear, clearly utterly chuffed with himself. Christopher sneezed again and blew his nose, but was roundly ignored as Mary and Remus stood up to get a better look. Lily, still pink and smiling, carefully lifted the lid of the box, and everyone leaned in. On a red velvet pillow with a bow around its neck was a tiny little charcoal grey kitten with huge yellow eyes. "Oh!" Lily gasped, reaching in immediately to pick up the mewing creature and cuddle it close. "Really, Potter? You got me a cat? I love him. Or her?" "Him," James nodded. "I know your old family one died last Christmas, and Hagrid told me a litter was born in the village last week, so—" "Oh, he's so sweet." Mary reached over to stroke the kitten's head. "Oh, for Merlin's sake." Christopher stood up, clutching his handkerchief to his nose. "I'm allergic to cats too. Bloody stupid day." With that, he got up and stormed away further up the table. "Such a shame." Sirius smirked, taking his empty seat. "Morning, Moony." "Morning, Padfoot," Remus smiled. The rest of breakfast was spent cooing over Lily's new kitten and trying to choose a name. Remus kept a polite distance, just in case. He'd had bad experiences with cats in the past and didn't fancy any new scratches today, no matter how tiny its claws were. Soon, everyone was getting up to go to their various lessons while arguing over who ought to look after the kitten that morning, and Sirius fell into step with Remus. "Walk you to history," he offered. "Oh, I don't need to go," Remus replied slyly. "It's a drop-in lesson, for newts." "But you always go to your lessons," Sirius replied, "even the optional ones." "I know, but you're always telling me to relax, so—" Remus covertly pulled his little matchbox out of his robe pocket and tapped it. Sirius raised an eyebrow. "As much as I really love Stone Moony, what's brought on the rebelliousness?" "Does there have to be a reason?" Remus shrugged. He glanced around quickly to check that no one was listening too intently, but they were all pretty absorbed in their various cards and gifts. He slipped the chocolate frog into Sirius's pocket. "Happy Valentine's Day, wanker." He had never seen Sirius Black blush like that. Chapter 1, 135, 7th Year, The Marauders Inter-House Prank Planning Cooperative. Wednesday the 15th of February, 1978. "I can't believe you're holding this thing here," Christopher said, agitatedly, as Remus unlocked the charms classroom. "Best way to avoid detection. Flitwick always lets me use it," Remus replied. "Exactly, it's so brazen," Christopher chided as they entered. "Brazen is our middle name," James declared excitedly, following them. "Your middle name is Fleamont, you prat," Sirius scoffed. "And this place is genius. No one will ever suspect anything. I knew your SWAT lessons would come in useful one day, Moony." "A lot of people find Remus's study group very helpful, actually," Christopher said primly, folding his arms and leaning against the wall. "Oh, Chris, he's just teasing," Remus chuckled, setting his book bag down. He glanced at his pocket watch. "We're all nice and early, James. Have you got an agenda?" "A what?" James turned around from the blackboard, where he was directing the chalk to draw a gigantic lion with Gryffindor rules OK beneath it. "Never mind," Remus sighed. "So who else got an invitation?" Christopher asked over the top of his book, which seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Christopher was the only other person Remus knew who could go from 0 to reading in less than 3 seconds flat. "About 20 or 30 people, maybe," Remus said. "Anyone who expressed an interest before Christmas who seemed trustworthy." "It was an extremely rigorous vetting process, actually," James said, now standing on Flitwick's desk and trying to touch the ceiling with his fingertips. "Yeah, we almost didn't let Wormtail in," Sirius barked with laughter from the window, where he was leaning half out of it, smoking. Remus dearly wanted to go over there and wrap his arms around Sirius, steal the cigarette, which was probably one of his anyway, the thief, and kiss his neck. But the others would be arriving soon, and it was a completely mental line of thinking that. "Why do you all call Peter that?" Christopher asked. "Just a nickname," they all said in unison. Peter arrived shortly after that, followed in by Mary, Lily, and Yasmin. Next were the 6th and 7th years from Remus's study group, and Dorcas, who was still on friendly terms with Peter, apparently. Mary's latest squeeze, a Ravenclaw boy called John T. Simmons, who looked like he couldn't believe his luck. And finally, much to Remus's distaste, Emmeline Vance sauntered in, 2 minutes late, with Roman Rotherhide. The room was pretty crowded after that, and noisy with the buzz of excitement. Most of the group had some idea why they were there, but others were curious, and all of them were fascinated by the marauders. Sirius and James adored the attention, of course, and immediately took centre stage. "Now, we all know why we're here," James started, using his Quidditch captain voice. Immediately, Emmeline Vance's arm shot up. "Sorry, but I don't—" Remus gave an impatient snort, and Christopher, sitting next to him, shot him a strange look. "Nor do I." Dorcas raised her hand too, along with 1 or 2 sixth years from Remus's study group. "Why did all of you come, then?" Sirius asked, eyebrows raised. A group of girls sitting at the back of the room giggled. Remus made a mental note. He'd tried to avoid inviting too many members of the Sirius Black fan club, but it was pretty unavoidable when that applied to half the school. "We're here to plan an organised protest," Christopher said, blushing a bit, because he wasn't used to speaking in front of lots of people. "Against Slytherin." "Yeah," another sixth year shouted. "I heard you lot were planning your biggest prank yet." "I heard one of you knows how to get to the monster out of the Chamber of Secrets." "I heard you were planning to blow up the dungeons," one Hufflepuff boy squeaked. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." James held up his hands. "Bit less dramatic than that." "Well, if it's about getting the Slytherins back for all the nonsense they've pulled, I'm in," Emmeline said decisively, tossing her luxuriant blonde curls. Remus tutted loudly, and Chris shot him another look. "That's exactly what it's about, and exactly why we need all of you to keep quiet about it," James said, getting into his flow now. "This is our last year, and we're inviting all of you to help us plan our final prank." "Does that make us marauders?" the Hufflepuff boy squeaked again. There was an excited murmur. "No," Peter said indignantly, though no one really paid him any attention. "I like to think of it as more of a collaboration," James said thoughtfully. "An inter-house cooperative," Sirius added. Everyone seemed pretty pleased with that, at least it sounded impressive and official enough. "Right," James clapped his hands together and rubbed them, smiling round at everyone. "Now that's out of the way, who's got some ideas?" 20 hands shot up. Lily spoke up. "I think before we get into that, it might be good to have some ground rules." "Like what?" Sirius folded his arms grumpily. "Like not actually hurting anyone? This is just fun, okay? Not revenge for everything Slytherin's ever done." She was using her head girl voice now, and a few people lowered their hands. "Fair enough," James said, holding up his hands amicably, coming between Sirius and Lily. "No physical harm intended. And as I said before, no talking about it outside of this room, on pain of death." "Joking, Evans." He ducked as she went to slap the back of his head. After these initial teething problems, everyone seemed to enter into the spirit of the thing. Lots of people had ideas. From the extreme, Lily vetoed summoning a banshee to haunt the dungeons. To the subtle, Emmeline knew of a spell which would transfigure everyone's right shoe into a left shoe. She said she'd done it to her sister over the summer, and it had taken her 3 days to realize what had been bothering her. Eventually, time ran short, so James set everyone homework, requiring them to come back next week with an idea. "Then we can decide on the best one," Sirius declared. "Who decides?" Mary narrowed her eyes. "Me, James, Pete and Mooney, obviously." Sirius raised his chin. "Can't we vote?" one of the sixth years asked. "Yeah, that seems fairer," Mary nodded. "If we're all putting ourselves at risk of expulsion for you." "Expulsion?" Christopher bit his lip. "Surely not. Surely we won't go that far." "Will we get in trouble, though?" The Hufflepuff boy raised his hand again. Everyone looked at him. "Not much." Sirius shrugged. "Bit of detention never hurt anyone?" "No, sorry, I don't mean detention." The boy shook his head nervously. "I mean with... You know the Slytherins. They won't tell the Death Eaters to get us, will they?" Sirius looked about to laugh when he realized that the atmosphere in the room had changed. A few people looked very awkward. Some of them were whispering amongst themselves. Remus could even smell a whiff of real fear creeping into the room. Everybody seemed to have tensed up a bit. Of course, Sirius and James did not worry about that sort of thing. This was all part of the crusade of chaos they'd been on since they were 11. Even Remus had been pretty flippant about the magnitude of the prank. But he saw now that it meant a lot more to those gathered in the room. James, Sirius and Peter were the only purebloods in attendance, unless you counted Christopher, who had his own axe to grind with the Slytherins. James stood up again, pushing off Flitwick's desk and drawing himself to full height. Absolutely not. No one in this room is getting hurt because of this prank. A few people relaxed. After all, James Potter, heir to the sleek easy fortune, head boy, Quidditch captain, and leading mischief maker, was somebody that most people trusted. Remus believed him wholeheartedly. Even if the issue had not been raised, it would have been a point of honor for James to protect anyone smaller than him. Lily was beaming at him too, and Sirius looked very pleased, as if that had settled everything. Right. Lily clapped her hands together now, taking the floor again. See you all again next week, I suppose. I think we'd all better leave in small groups, don't want to draw attention to ourselves. With that, the room slowly returned to normal, groups of students now chattering excitedly about ideas they'd had or curses they'd like to try out. Lily assumed her head girl voice and started directing people out of the room in groups of 3 or 4 at short intervals. The marauders turned inwards to confer. "Bloody hell," James muttered so that he wouldn't be overheard. "That was intense." "What did you expect?" Mary tutted, hoisting herself up onto the desk and swinging her legs. "This isn't a game to everyone. Some people are out for revenge." "Then that's what we'll give them," Sirius said fiercely. He had that brightness in his eyes that told Remus he would be utterly unbearable for the next few hours. A plan was afoot, and nothing could bring Sirius down from that kind of excitement. "Calm down, Black," Mary teased. "You're school kids, not generals." "For now," he replied darkly. "Okay, you lot." Lily turned back into the room. It was only the 7 of them left. "We'll go back in 2 groups, because no one is going to believe you 4 weren't up to something." Mary, James, Lily and Peter left first, with instructions for Remus, Sirius and Christopher to give them a 10-minute head start. Remus was a bit reluctant about this, but there was no way to bring it up. He couldn't help remembering what had happened the last time he and Christopher were alone in that classroom with Sirius. Though, of course, Christopher hadn't known Sirius was there at the time, and nor would Remus ever tell him. They tidied up the desks, cleared the chalkboard of James's lion, then stood about awkwardly for a little bit. "Let's play truth or dare." Sirius grinned. "Why?" Remus sighed, leaning on the desk. "Here we go. Pass the time. Or we could just have a normal conversation. Christopher wants to, don't you, Christopher?" Great, you can go first. Truth or dare, what do you fancy?" Chris's eyes flicked between Remus and Sirius nervously. "I don't, truth?" "Excellent. Start off easy if it's your first time playing." Sirius nodded encouragingly. Let me see. Okay, why did you want to get involved with the prank?" "What?" "You know, how come you came today?" "Chris has been involved since the beginning, Padfoot, you know that." Remus tutted. Right. So what made you get involved in the first place, then?" "If you have to know," Christopher said rather icily, "it was your brother." Sirius, to his credit, did not flinch. "Fair enough, he's a right little prick." He nodded. He licked his lips and glanced at Remus, then back at Chris. "Sure there was no other reason?" "No. I'll go next," Remus said quickly. "Chris, you can ask me to do a dare." He never picked truth. It was far too dangerous. Christopher bit his lip, still a bit thrown by this whole thing. "Oh, I don't know. I'm crap at this sort of thing." "I've got a good one," Sirius said at once. He winked at Remus, then leaned over and whispered in Chris's ear. Christopher's eyes widened and he laughed, covering his mouth. "Okay, Remus." Chris was still blushing, but he was having fun now. "Okay, you have to write something rude on the blackboard and leave it there." "I gave you specifics," Sirius complained. "I'm not saying that out loud." Christopher laughed, turning even redder. Remus could easily guess the tone of Sirius's suggestion. He raised an eyebrow wryly, as if under duress. "Okay, fine, I'll do it." He went up to the board and picked up some chalk. He considered it for a moment. How rude. He asked the other 2 casually. "Very," Christopher said, smirking shyly. "Well, it's the rules of the game, I suppose." Remus began to draw, enjoying the snickering over his shoulder as he deftly traced out the first rude thing that popped into his head. He stepped back, an artist admiring his work. The other 2 boys stood either side of him, grinning madly. "Well?" he asked. Sirius slapped him on the back. "Mooney, me old pal, it's the biggest knob I've ever seen." "Well, that's a relief." Remus smirked, forgetting Christopher was there. He didn't seem to notice, or else just assumed that it was marauder humour, which it sort of was. "Glorious." The younger boy nodded, still very pink about the cheeks. "Come on then." Remus set down the chalk. "That's enough of a gap. We can go now. Common room?" "Oi, I've not had my turn yet." Sirius folded his arms. "What's the point?" Remus shook his head. "You always choose a dare, and there's nothing I can think of that you'd even think twice about doing." "Are you saying I'm the bravest?" "Stupidest, maybe," Remus teased, elbowing him in the ribs. "Come on, let's go." They left the classroom and set off through the quiet hallways back to Gryffindor Tower. It was fairly late in the evening now, and curfew was only a couple of hours off, so they were alone most of the way, other than the portraits, who were enjoying the peace and quiet. "Did you finish Morris, Remus?" Chris asked, always back to books. "Nearly," Remus replied. "Just a chapter or two to go. Do you promise me it's a happy ending?" "Definitely," Chris nodded. "You'll love it. I was thinking, if you're free on Saturday, we could have a chat about it in the Three Broomsticks. I'd really like to know what you think." "Yeah, maybe." Remus was torn between his desire not to disappoint Christopher, which he always seemed to be doing, and his keen awareness of Sirius's very mercurial mood. "Don't see why not." "Is that the Muggle book you've been reading?" Sirius asked. "Is it good then?" "Yeah, quite good." Remus nodded cautiously. "Great. Maybe I'll read it then. I can get it done by Saturday. I read faster than you." "You do not," Remus scowled, scandalized. "Well, I have more time to read anyway." "Only because you hardly go to half your lessons," Remus shot back. "I doubt it's your sort of thing, Sirius." Christopher spoke up. They both looked at him. He shrugged. "Well, it's not. Tell him what it's about, Remus." But it was too late. Sirius was already rummaging in the book bag at Remus's hip as they walked, and at once withdrew the text. Remus fought the urge to snatch it back, only because he'd underlined some parts of it, just because he'd liked them so much, and he was embarrassed about it now. "I think you're beautiful, the only beautiful person I've ever seen. I love your voice and everything to do with you, down to your clothes or the room you are sitting in. I adore you." Fortunately, Sirius didn't flip through the pages, only looked at the back cover, frowning slightly. "Isn't this one of my uncle's?" he asked. "Yeah, you said I could borrow it." Remus rubbed the back of his head. "Is it dirty?" "No." "Oh, well, I'll read it anyway." Sirius poked out his tongue. "That can be my dare." "Very brave." Remus grabbed back the book and shoved it in his bag. "But it's about—" Christopher frowned. They were almost at the portrait hole now, and Sirius stopped, making all three of them stop too. Sirius looked at Remus. Raising an eyebrow, he nodded to Chris. "He makes a lot of assumptions, this one." Remus was surprised to find that his own cheeks were heating up too. He shrugged. "He doesn't know you very well." "Oi, Christopher!" Sirius shot him a very wicked look. "Dare me to snog Mooney?" "What? Christopher looked stricken, as if he knew there was a joke somewhere, but he couldn't figure out the punchline. Sirius wasted no time. He took Remus's head roughly and pulled him in for a kiss. Remus gave in. It was a bit mean, but he could hardly refuse. If it was a test of loyalty or simply something Sirius thought would be funny, he had to go along with it. "Oh, for Merlin's sake!" A voice came from further up the corridor, causing Sirius and Remus to spring apart. "I'm away for a week, and the castle turns into an orgy." All three boys spun around to see Marlene standing there in her travelling cloak, duffel bag at her side. She gave them a knowing smirk. What a load of queers. Chapter 136, 7th Year, Mind Games. Everyone was thrilled to see Marlene, of course. Sirius ushered her through the fat lady portrait as fast as he could and practically trumpeted her arrival to the whole common room, as though he had conjured her from thin air. Lily and James rushed over, hugging her and taking her bag and cloak and leading her to the couch by the fireplace, where Mary hugged her so fiercely Marlene almost squeaked. "We've missed you!" Mary exclaimed, finally letting her friend go. "I can see that," Marlene gasped. pink-cheeked. "Have you all been that bored without me?" Remus hung back a little. He and Marlene didn't hug much anyway, so he didn't think it would be noticed. He watched her warily and chose to sit in the armchair furthest away from her, trying not to draw attention to himself. Christopher had slipped away too at some point, maybe up to his dorm room. In the back of his mind, Remus hoped Chris wasn't angry with him, but he filed that away for another time. He had too much to worry about with Marlene's return. "How's Danny?" Mary was asking now, lowering her voice. "He's recovering." Marlene nodded, her eyes serious. "He's at home now. Mum's driving him crazy as usual. He won't be going back to the Cannons." She swallowed and looked down at her hands. "It's a bloody disgrace." James banged his fist on the arm of the couch. "If I was their manager, He's too badly injured anyway." Marlene shook her head, wiping quickly under her eyes. "He'd have been off for the rest of the season either way. It'll be months before he's back on a broom, so just as well." "Still bollocks," James muttered. "Yeah, well," Marlene looked up stonily. "Can hardly blame them. I know I would have. Anyway, not worth thinking about." Remus felt sick with tension. Everyone else sitting in the group knew what he was, everyone except Marlene. The guilt he had been successfully avoiding for a week came crashing back over him like a cold shower. It had been his responsibility to warn everyone of the attack. He had told Dumbledore, but it hadn't been enough. He'd failed, and now the evidence of his failure was sitting right in front of him, her face thin and her eyes dark with worry. Marlene cleared her throat and flashed them all a brave smile. "I'm going to talk to Madame Pumphrey as soon as I can, see if she recommends anything. The healers at St. Mungo's were useless, more concerned with keeping him quarantined than actually helping him. Hardly anyone could answer the questions I had about transformations or aftercare or pain relief. It was like they'd rather I just stopped talking about him, like they wanted to pretend he wasn't there." Her voice was getting higher and thinner as she said this, tears threatening to choke her. She cleared her throat again. "I mean, I know what he is, don't get me wrong. I know what he's going to become. But he's still my brother, for fuck's sake." "Of course he is," Mary said, squeezing Marlene's hand. She gave Remus a look, and he looked at his feet. No way. Absolutely not. No one else was speaking, but they all had the same look on their faces. "Are they thinking about me?" Remus wondered, queasily. "Do they blame me? Are they wondering what I'm capable of?" "Anyway," Marlene shook her head again. "What's been going on here? Is that your cat, Lily?" "Valentine's Day present," Lily smiled, stroking the purring bundle in her lap. "His name's Hieronymus." "Catchy," Marlene sniffed, smiling. "Nice one, Potter, you big softy." "You're still on the team, right?" James asked, leaning forward. "My star beater?" "Obviously," she rolled her eyes. "I'm assuming the training times haven't changed." "First thing tomorrow morning," James grinned. "And we're planning this huge—" Peter started eagerly, but was cut off. "Oi, McKinnon." They all turned around to see Yasmin standing behind the couch, hands on her hips and grinning widely. She'd obviously been getting ready for bed. Her hair was piled messily up on her head, and she was wearing in her oversized Holyhead Harpies shirt and a baggy pair of men's Winceyette pyjama bottoms. "All right, Patel," Marlene answered. Remus couldn't see her face, but he knew she was smiling. She twisted round on the couch and got up on her knees, and the girls hugged tightly. You could do that, Remus realized, if you were girls. No one thought it was weird. He wondered if Sirius was thinking the same thing. He hoped not. That pretty much put an end to any more werewolf talk, which was a relief. Remus just hoped he could avoid it later, when it was just him and Sirius. He was sure to want to know how Remus felt and what his thoughts were. And while yes, okay, Remus did understand that communication was important and blah blah blah. Did that mean they had to discuss every painful thing in minute detail? For God's sake, he was already getting agitated about it, and it hadn't even happened. He cracked his neck and then his shoulders, willing himself to loosen up. He was still a bit wound up from that kiss out in the corridor, he realized. He wasn't sure whether or not Sirius had meant it that way, or if it was all just a show for Christopher, but it had stirred something in Remus, and now it felt like unfinished business. He shifted a bit in his seat and tried to ignore that too. Mary had tactfully moved to the other end of the couch and was now casually filing her nails and chatting to Lily, who was teasing Hieronymus with a quill. Yaz climbed over the back of the sofa to take her place, and she and Marlene had their heads together, speaking very quickly and very quietly. Remus caught the muggy scent of the muffliato spell, which was odder from the outside than the inside, as if their very words were blurred out somehow. They were sitting so close to each other that their thighs touched, Yaz's arms slung around the back of the couch just behind Marlene's head in a way that would have raised eyebrows, even if only one of them was a boy. James and Sirius were in a deep conversation about the upcoming Quidditch match against Ravenclaw, Peter eagerly interjecting every now and then with his own tactical insights. Remus pulled his book out and tried to read. It was no good. He couldn't concentrate with so many people chatting. The last postcard from Grant was tucked into the dust jacket of Maurice, and he read it again. This time the photo on the front was of 3 bikini-clad girls frolicking in the sea. Even Sirius had found that one funny. There wasn't much on the back. Grant was a man of few words when it came to written correspondence. Working hard, having fun, hope you're well, love, that word again. Obviously Grant could say it, or write it. He couldn't spell Remus's surname the same way twice, but love was no big deal. Ugh. Only half an hour ago, Remus had been almost completely free from worry, cocooned by his friends and Sirius, and the idiotic notion that everything would be okay if they could just come up with a really good prank. But the shade had fallen now, and no matter where he looked, all Remus could see was trouble and his own failings. Frustrated, he slammed his book closed on the postcard, a little too hard. Everyone looked up. "All right there, Moony?" Lily asked gently. "Fine, sorry," Remus nodded. He reached into his pockets for a cigarette, pulling out his matchbox quickly. "Not in the common room, please." Lily switched to head girl mode as quick as a flash. Right, sorry." He clumsily clambered to his feet, fag pursed between his lips. "I'll go upstairs." "We're going to bed too," Marlene said, then blushed and stammered quickly. "I mean upstairs, to sleep, if we've got an early practice." Yaz was barely able to keep a straight face as she waved goodbye to them all, before hurrying up the stairs after her girlfriend. Mary and Remus shared a knowing look, but James and Lily still seemed blissfully ignorant. "Night." Remus nodded to everyone, heaving his bag onto his shoulder and heading up the opposite flight of stairs to the boys' dormitories. It was a mistake. Alone, he had nothing to distract him from his own judgments, and they were harsh. Quite right, too, in Remus's opinion. If the McKinnon family could not forget the repercussions of his failure to act, then why should he have any respite? And those were just the people he knew he had let down. There were families up and down the country now, facing a full moon for the first time. It was a good thing his father was dead, and his mother had washed her hands of him. At least he couldn't cause them any more pain. He sat on the window ledge, letting the cold air wash over him, smoking and thinking and scolding himself until he thought he may as well just fling himself out of it. But that was just a passing fancy. Remus was too much of a coward to do what ought to be done, this much he knew. Still, he felt a strong urge to do something drastic, something violent. The wolf inside would have liked a good long run, but it would be past curfew soon. There was a bit of dope in his sock drawer, but that would only make him more gloomy. Someone was hiding a bottle of fire whiskey. He could smell it, but that was probably in preparation for his own upcoming birthday, and he couldn't spoil that for his friends. Maybe put a record on and flail around a bit, but he'd never been much for dancing, and his hip was bothering him. Sirius's footfall on the stairs disrupted his thoughts. Remus licked his lips, remembering that kiss from earlier. Ah, there was always that. The ultimate distraction. Decision made, he stubbed out the cigarette and got up, striding purposefully across the room. He reached the door just as Sirius pushed it open. Best not to even give him a chance. "Watcher, Moony, just came to see if you're—" He shut him up with a fierce kiss, crushing their lips together, pulling him at the hips so that they were pressed hard against each other. "Oh, okay," Sirius gasped, when he finally wrenched himself free. He kicked the door shut behind himself as Remus dragged him to the bed. It was good, really, really good. Remus's frustrated urgency was met with answering eagerness from Sirius, and they tore against each other, out of sync in the best possible way. Losing yourself in drink or drugs was nothing compared to losing yourself in Sirius Black. They'd been at this long enough now to know the edges of each other's limits and just how far they could push them. "Fuck!" Sirius groaned when it was all over, and the windows were steamy and the waxing moon had risen outside. Remus reached for his fags once more, still buzzing, his hot skin humming. "Fuck!" Sirius said again, on his back, staring up. "Beautiful mess. What brought that on?" "Just you," Remus replied, exhaling smoke. "Just wanted it." "Not complaining?" Remus settled back, smoking quietly. This was good. This was better anyway than anything else he could be doing. He was still restless, though, a bit more tired, but fidgety and unsettled. He could go again. He could go all night if it would shut his brain up. That made him glance at the door. They hadn't shut the curtains, and by some miracle got away with it. "Where are the others?" Sirius's eyes had drifted shut, but he stirred awake valiantly. Pete's 3 rounds into a chess game with the second year, who's obviously some sort of evil mastermind. Mary went to bed, and Prongs and the missus have gone to the prefect's bathrooms. They thought they were being subtle." He chuckled lightly under his breath. "I'm going to brush my teeth," Remus said, getting up. In the bathroom, everything came flooding back, and he couldn't meet his own eyes in the mirror. When he came back out, Sirius had woken up a bit and was sitting up on bed. He smiled at Remus. "Hey, I just wanted to check you were okay about Marlene and everything." "Fine," Remus nodded casually, climbing back in, drawing the curtains closed as he did. "It's good to have her back." I hope you're not worried about—" "Do we have to talk about that?" Remus crawled towards him, straddling his lap. He began kissing Sirius's neck, rocking into him slowly. "Blimey, again?" Sirius sounded surprised, but not exactly unhappy about it. Remus replied, taking his wrists and holding them tight. Such lovely, lovely wrists. Well, okay, but if you are worried—" "Shut up, Black," Remus growled, pulling back and meeting his eye. Sirius did, biting his lip. Remus smiled. "Much better. No more talking tonight." It was a cruel trick, really, exploiting Sirius's peculiar proclivity for following direct instructions. But it worked, and Remus got his peace, at least that night. The next day was tougher, but lessons and library time became a comfortable barrier between them once again, not to mention the general rabble of friends who accompanied them pretty much everywhere. A wiser, braver man might have used the time to look into himself, to address the feelings of guilt and shame and self-disgust, and maybe make some changes for the better. Remus preferred pretending everything was fine, and for a little while anyway, it seemed that Sirius was going to let him. They were still together almost all of the time, and it wasn't as if they were arguing. If Sirius wondered why Remus's libido rocketed any time they started to have a private conversation, he didn't say anything. In the end, he took a different tact. The weekend before the upcoming full moon, they were walking back up to school from Hogsmeade, and Remus had had to slow down because of his stupid hip yet again. Sirius and James were chatting ahead, but Christopher hung back to keep Remus company. They had been to the 3 broomsticks, but the whole big group of them, and Christopher was always too shy to talk much in that sort of situation, so he was taking his chances now. "I'm glad you liked the book," he said, hands in his pockets as he walked. "Wasn't it a nice ending?" "Yeah, great," Remus puffed, rubbing his hip to try and get it going. "Maurice, the character, reminded me a bit of you." "What?" "Nah." He was starting to sweat with exertion, despite the cold February air. He wiped his forehead, squinting uphill. Sirius and James were striding ahead, laughing about something together. Christopher followed his eyeline. He pressed his lips together. "Are you and he—" He couldn't find the words, and Remus knew what that was like, so he just gave a straight answer. No need to be coy. "Yeah, we are." "Oh." Christopher sounded deflated, as if he had still thought it was all a joke at his expense. "What's that like, then?" "I don't know. Good. Great." "I wish it—" He sounded so sad, and he never finished the sentence. After a long time, and more struggling to keep up, Remus touched his shoulder gently. "There's someone for everyone, Chris." "Maybe." "Oi, Mooney, come on!" Sirius was yelling. They were almost at school now. Sirius had stopped under the stone arch gateway to wait. "See you later, okay, Remus?" Christopher muttered, hurrying off at a funny little jog. Remus ploughed on, finally reaching the school gate. His hip was screaming at him now, the joints burning, pain shooting up and down his leg. He nodded at Sirius by way of greeting, too out of breath to speak. He leaned against the stone with one arm, hoping Sirius wouldn't mind waiting a bit longer while he pulled himself together. "Sorry," he panted finally. "Hate that fucking hill." "Are you okay?" Sirius asked, giving him a funny look. "Sorry, didn't mean to leave you behind." "Fine," Remus replied. "You know me, just a bit wonky." He straightened up, winced, and rubbed his side again. "Is it your hip?" Sirius had his hands on his hips now, and was giving him an up-and-down sort of look that was rather like Madame Pumphrey after a bad full moon. "Yeah," Remus shrugged. "It's always been a bit funny." "When you say a bit funny, do you mean that you're in pain?" "So just sore," Remus said, indignant. "So pain, then?" Sirius raised an eyebrow. Remus hated that superior look. "How long has it been hurting?" "Oh, I dunno." Remus threw his hands up, exasperated. "What was the point of this?" "Since I was 13. "Are you joking?" "Just off and on." "What does Madame Pumphrey say?" "Oh, for God's sake, I don't whinge to her about this sort of crap." Remus was aware that his voice was getting louder. A few third-years walking past turned and looked at him before running away, giggling. "You're being ridiculous." Sirius folded his arms and tossed his hair. "She's a nurse. She's supposed to make you feel better. What would you do if I told you I'd been in pain for 5 years? "It's not the same." "What are you on about?" "You're not a fucking He stopped himself just in time. They both looked around themselves furtively, checking no one was listening in. Remus scolded himself. It had been a very long time since he'd let anyone get the better of his temper. Sirius leaned forward, glaring at him. "You don't deserve to suffer, for fuck's sake," he muttered. That hurt. He didn't know why, but it struck Remus so sharply it knocked the breath out of him, and his eyes pricked. He straightened up, careful to remain expressionless this time. He jutted his chin out at Sirius, meeting his glare. "I'm not talking about this anymore. Come on, we'll miss dinner," and began to stride ahead, biting back against the stabbing in his side. Chapter 1, 137, 7th year, Remus the Martyr, Wednesday the 22nd of February, 1978. The stalemate between Remus and Sirius lasted for the rest of the weekend. Sunday was the Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw Quidditch game, so they got away with not speaking much. They both sat together in the stands, cheering when it was appropriate, and booing any time the Ravenclaws scored. "And that's another 10 points to Gryffindor," the commentator called out through the megaphone. "An overwhelming 60 points now scored by team captain James Potter. No surprises there. Fans are starting to wonder what will become of the mighty Lions next year when they don't have their golden boy to depend on. Oof, mind that bludger, Sims. Nicely done. Though I must say I'd have veered left, but I suppose not everybody is chosen for their dexterity. Sometimes it's just about giving everyone a chance, regardless of ability." "Who let Lockhart do the commentary?" Sirius grumbled. "Stupid Pratt doesn't even know anything about Quidditch." "He told me he was lined up to play for Puddlemere," Peter said, "and the only reason he never played for Ravenclaw was that his coach said he shouldn't squander his gift in school games." "You're so gullible, Pete," Remus nudged him. "I know more about Quidditch than that twat." "Yeah, and Mooney knows about as much about Quidditch as you know about judging character," Sirius added, his voice unnecessarily sharp. Remus coloured. Fine if Sirius wanted to be passive-aggressive. "Well, Padfoot," he replied coolly, "if you want to do it so much, go and ask McGonagall. I think you'd be perfect for the job." "You what?" Sirius gaped at him. Remus raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, you're the only person in this school who chats more shit than Lockhart does." Mary and Lily burst into giggles, covering their mouth. Sirius scowled. "Up yours," he muttered. The game ended with 280 points to Gryffindor, but Sirius wasn't cheering. Quidditch matches generally took up most of the day, from an early breakfast listening to James's pep talks to the inevitable after-party in the common room. Sirius stayed up late, so nobody noticed that they didn't go to bed together. By Monday, they were on slightly more civil terms, or at least neither of them wanted any of their friends to know they'd been fighting. Remus immersed himself in his Newt revision. If he wasn't alone in the library, he was extending his group study sessions to run an hour longer than usual each night. It was the week of the full moon, and he was utterly exhausted, but at least it made getting to sleep easier. And he had to avoid Marlene too, of course. He deliberately skipped going to Madame Pumphrey's Tuesday night healing classes, just in case the subject of werewolves reared its ugly head again. Marlene was the sort of girl who would derail an entire lesson if she thought injustice was being done somewhere. To Remus's surprise, Gilderoy Lockhart, the smarmy Ravenclaw commentator, made a guest appearance in his Wednesday revision group. Lockhart was in the year below and hadn't crossed the Marauders' radar much so far. He was a bit camp and annoying, prone to laughing too loudly in the dining hall, but that was all Remus knew about him. He sidled up to Remus, his hair in ridiculous blonde bouffant curls. He stank of aftershave, too. "Love this idea," he gushed. "Helping other students to achieve. Really great." Yeah, I suppose," Remus replied, shuffling his papers. "Thought I'd lend a hand," Lockhart grinned toothily. "I'm rather a whiz myself, you know. Charms, transfiguration, potions, you name it." Great. Cheers." Remus nodded. "I said I'd go through anti-giant legislation with the third years today, but have a chat with Chris." He moved away quickly, leaving Christopher to deal with it. Wednesday was also the second official meeting of the prank planning group, so Remus and Chris stayed back in the charms room after study group. Chris had a vaguely dazed expression as they leaned against Flitwick's desk, waiting. "Sorry about that," Remus offered, lighting up a cigarette as Lockhart swanned out. "I don't know how to deal with him." "Oh, it's fine. He's in half my classes, so I'm used to it," Chris replied, still looking a bit disturbed. "What did he want?" "It took a while to figure out," Christopher frowned. "He kept telling me how good he is at everything, but I think he wanted help with charms." Remus snorted disdainfully. The prank planning session was shorter than the week before. It turned out that no one had had any decent ideas yet. The fourth year, Ravenclaws had uncovered some frankly terrifying curses which they were all eager to share, but Lily stepped in, reiterating the rule that nobody ought to get hurt. They split up again for the journey back to their common rooms, and Remus was faced with a choice between Marlene and Yaz or Sirius and Mary. In the end, he decided it was better the devil he knew and chose Sirius and Mary. She did most of the talking, which was a relief, and the only awkward moment came when the boys were all back in the dormitory. Remus went over to his own bed, pulling back the duvet. "You're sleeping there, then?" Sirius asked out of the blue. Remus frowned, turning to look at him. He hadn't thought it was up for debate. They were barely speaking to each other. Why on earth would they sleep together? And why on earth did Sirius want to call attention to it in front of the others? "Yeah," he nodded, turning back. "Full moon tomorrow. Thought we should all get as much sleep as possible." "Yeah, fair enough," Sirius replied. Remus climbed in and drew his curtains shut without another word. "Everything okay?" James whispered very loudly. Sirius grunted a response, and that was that. Thursday, the 23rd of February, 1978. Remus was more on edge than usual on the day of the full moon. He'd slept badly anyway, thinking about the McKinnons and Sirius and wondering how he was ever going to fix any of it. At breakfast, it looked as though Marlene had had a difficult night too. Her eyes were rimmed red, and her hair was messier than usual. Yaz and Mary sat either side of her, vying to be the one who comforted her the most. "I just can't stop thinking about him." Marlene shook her head, staring into her bowl of cornflakes. "I've read so many books and accounts, and they all say it hurts a lot." Remus stopped eating his own breakfast and sipped his tea instead, trying to hide his distress. "I've read that too," Sirius said, "but I'm sure that as long as Danny asks for the help he needs, he'll be fine." Remus tried to ignore this, seething quietly under his collar. Mum's had to take him to the ministry. Marlene continued, miserable. They have cells there, apparently. We asked if there would be healers present, but no one can tell me anything. I'm sure it's the best place. Yaz squeezed her arm gently. Nobody agreed with her. Mary pursed her lips. He doesn't deserve this. Marlene burst into tears. He doesn't deserve to be locked up alone. He's my lovely brother, not some animal. The nausea of guilt threatened to overwhelm Remus, and he left as soon as he could. The rest of the day he could barely concentrate on his lessons. Perverse as it was, ever since the Marauders had become animagi, he'd sort of looked forward to full moons at Hogwarts. It had been a while since he'd dreaded one quite so much as this. When he arrived at Madame Pumphrey's office in the evening, he found her frowning her way through a pile of letters. He'd never seen her doing paperwork before. Oh, hello, dear. She smiled at him tiredly. Shall we get going? He nodded and waited patiently for her to put on her cloak. She saw him staring at the letters. They're from ex-pupils, mostly, she explained, ones who were affected by the attacks. Some of them have family members facing their first full moon, and want to know if I know anything helpful. Oh, I've been able to pass on a bit about aftercare, but you and I know how little real information there is, she continued as they walked out. Remus remained mute. I've had poor Miss McKinnon here every day, almost. She's a friend of yours, isn't she? Yes. Remus's voice cracked slightly. Madame Pumphrey patted his arm softly. It must be very hard for you, my dear. It's fine. You know you can always talk to me if you need to. Thanks. He could hear Sirius's voice in the back of his head, taunting him. I told you so. But Sirius was wrong. Physical pain was the very least of Remus's problems, and something he was willing to bear if he had to. It reminded him what he owed. Despite his apprehension, the full moon was a relief. Remus didn't even cry out from the pain of transformation. He just let it consume him. As ashamed as it made him, it was good to become something else for a few hours, to relinquish control. The wolf was still on good terms with Padfoot at least, and they could play and run and hunt without any messy human problems getting in the way. But it wasn't to last. Friday, the 24th of February, 1978. The routine was standard by now. Remus transformed back, the others checked he was okay, then left. Madame Pumphrey came to collect him. He spent the morning under a sleeping draught, woke up in time for lunch, then headed back to his own bed in the afternoon. More recently, Sirius had been coming to collect him from the infirmary, if his timetable allowed for it. And actually, even when his timetable didn't allow for it, Sirius took any excuse to bunk off. Of course, given the way Remus had been acting, he didn't expect Sirius to come that day. But Sirius was always full of surprises. Brought you a frog, he said, waiting patiently as Remus finished tying his laces. He handed over a chocolate frog box, which Remus accepted. His temper had cooled quite a bit. Perhaps a good long sleep had been all he needed. Thanks. Can we be okay again? Sirius asked, sounding genuinely sorry. Can we both just admit we said some stupid stuff, but it's over now? Remus looked at him for a long time, letting him stew a little bit. Then he smiled. Yeah, go on then. They walked back to the tower quite happily, though Remus was pushing himself a bit harder than normal, trying not to limp or show any trace of discomfort. Is Marlene okay? Remus asked as they neared the common room. Yeah, think so. Sirius nodded. She got a letter from her mum this morning saying Danny's okay, cried a bit, but she's less of a state now. Good, that's good. They pushed through the portrait hole and walked through the common room. I think I'll go straight to bed for a bit, Remus said, making for the dorm. If that's okay. Of course. Sirius nodded, over polite, as they headed up yet another flight of stairs. Remus was seriously struggling now, but he'd be damned if he'd let Sirius see it. You tired? Remus asked. Nah, Sirius said. Slept all morning. Peter too. Oh, good. Remus finally reached his bed and sat down. Without even thinking, his hand went to rub his hip. He stopped as soon as he realized, but Sirius's eyes zeroed in on it at once. He looked Remus in the eye reproachfully. Did you speak to Madame Pumphrey? We had a lovely chat, thanks. Remus stiffened, defences back up. About all her poor ex-students who had to transform for the first time last night. It was really cheery. Sirius tutted. But did you talk to her about your hip? No, Remus huffed, lying down. Remus, stop being difficult. You see her every week. Just mention to her. I mean, I'll do it if you want me to. Jesus Christ, not this again. Leave me alone. Remus sat up again. No, Sirius retorted, just as viciously. I don't understand why you won't tell her about it. I'm sure she could help. Oh, my God, why can't you just drop it? I said I don't want to bother her with crap like this. You're making such a big fuss over nothing. Remus was on his feet now, the wolf inside him wanting the higher ground, asserting dominance. And you're avoiding your problems again, Sirius raged. You always do this, and it's so bloody exhausting. You think you're being so mature, do you? Keeping everything bottled up. It's stupid. You're just making a martyr of yourself. It's like you want to be miserable. Oh, get fucked, Black, Remus shouted back. Easy for you to have a go, isn't it? Why do we always have to talk about my shit life, HM? Mr. Tell Me a Fucking Secret. Sirius blinked, shocked, and Remus was elated. He had something now. He had Sirius in his jaws. He wasn't letting go until he tasted blood. What about you, Sirius? How come we never get to talk about your fucked-up family with your Death-Eater brother and your insane cousin? Why don't we talk about your pain and your scars for a little while? See how that feels. Remus, for fuck's sake. No, I know. Why don't we talk about your mother? Remus went in for the kill, and it was more effective than even he had expected. Sirius changed completely. His expression froze. His posture tensed, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Remus almost wished he had punched him, because then at least Sirius could just punch him back, and they could have a fair fight, and that would be it. But that hadn't been fair, and he couldn't take it back. Sirius gave him a look of utter hurt and shock before turning quickly to anger. Go fuck yourself, Lupin, he spat, storming out. Yeah, piss off then, Remus shouted as the door slammed. He was breathing hard and his face was very hot. He wished Sirius would come back and shout at him a bit more so he could shout back, but he settled for chain smoking and the Sex Pistols. Fuck everybody. Sirius did not return, and Remus didn't know where the map was, so he couldn't look for him. Eventually, the dorm room door did open again, and Lily and James came in, very close together, and whispering happily, "Oh, hiya, Mooney." James stopped as he caught sight of Remus brooding by the window. He looked a bit sheepish. "Sorry, we thought you'd be in the hospital wing still." "No, she lets me go after lunch normally," Remus replied, monotone. He got up. "I'll get out of your way." No, Remus, don't," Lily said, flustered. "We just came up here for the quiet." "Really?" Remus raised a sarcastic eyebrow, and Lily and James blushed, looking away. "Where's Padfoot?" James went over to sit on his bed. "Don't know." "What?" "Don't know, don't care." Remus withdrew another cigarette from his matchbox and lit it with the end of the last one. "Are you having a fight?" "Look, stay out of it, Potter," Remus snarled. James recoiled and looked at Lily, who shrugged back at him. At that very moment, as if it had been summoned just to break the tension, an owl flew in the open window, surprising all three of them. It was from the Potters, and James retrieved 2 letters tied to its leg. He glanced down at one and held it out to Remus. "For you, Mooney." Clicking his tongue irritably, Remus got up off the sill and went to snatch it from James's outstretched hand. He opened it, skimming the brief note from Mrs. Potter, who had been so kindly forwarding all of his correspondence. He expected another postcard from Grant, but it was a neatly folded envelope. He didn't recognize the tidy blue-ink handwriting, but it had a Muggle stamp. He looked down at the return address, written in tiny script on the back. If undelivered, please return to Ms. Hope Jenkins, Sparrow Ward, Cardiff City Hospital, Cardiff. Chapter 138, 7th Year Hope. Remus choked on his fag, then dropped it, burning a hole in his trousers. Yelping with pain, he leapt up, patting wildly at the hot patch on his thigh. "Remus!" Lily stared at him, alarmed. "Are you okay?" Yeah. He picked up the cigarette and tossed it out of the window. He'd scrunched up the little envelope in his other hand. He stuffed the crumpled paper into his pocket. "Just nipping to the loo." He hurried into the little bathroom and slammed the door shut, trying to regulate his breathing a bit. Okay. He ought to have expected this. He was the one who'd written to her, after all. Remus pulled the letter out of his pocket and smoothed it out. He couldn't have opened it in front of Lily and James. It might say anything, and he was so unprepared. He bit his lip. He wanted another cigarette badly, but he'd just chucked the last one out of the window. Typical. He peeled open the envelope slowly, taking care not to tear it, as if that might mean something. The paper was tissue-thin, and he unfolded it gently. The handwriting was more recognizable now. He knew it from the original letter, written all those years ago, except now it was more spindly, noticeably crooked, as though the hand had been shaking. Dear Remus, I am sorry it has taken me so long to reply to you. I am afraid I have been unwell, and I have not been at home to receive post. I was so happy to hear from you. I am sorry I cannot write more, my darling, but I would love to hear how you are getting on. Please write again to the address below. Love, Mum. Remus's own hands were shaking now. Love, Mum. What the fuck did that mean? He felt rage creeping up on him, ready to swallow him whole. The spat with Sirius faded into insignificance. Now he was truly furious. It was an anger that had lain dormant for a long time now, but it had always been there, in the core of him. An anger that had no direction, no purpose other than filling him up with red-hot mania. Maybe Greyback had put it there. Maybe Hope's abandonment had. Right now, he didn't give a shit. Unable to control himself, he kicked the bathroom door. He kicked it so hard that he splintered the wood, cracking it right through. Fuck, he muttered. Ow! He hoped he hadn't broken a toe. Oh my God, Remus! Lily's voice sang out again. Sorry, he said, almost on instinct, as he wrenched his foot free from the door. He unlocked it. James was standing right there, his eyes big and wide, Lily just behind him, as if he was shielding her from Remus. What the bloody hell are you playing at? James said, his voice hard. Look, if you're having a tiff with Padfoot, then sort it out between you. Don't start tearing our room apart. Sorry, Remus said again, feeling quite small. He'd never been told off by James before. It was scarier than he'd expected. Remus. Lily pushed her boyfriend aside impatiently. What's wrong? He shook his head, looking down at the letter in his hands. His shoulders slumped. He was still breathing too hard to be able to speak. He handed it to her. Lily gave him a quizzical look, but took the paper from him. As she read it, her eyes grew bigger and her mouth dropped open. James read it over her shoulder, and soon enough their expressions matched. Remus couldn't seem to get his breathing under control. He wasn't quite sure what was happening. His chest grew very tight, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He suddenly felt very hot and very dizzy, and he was seeing stars. He stumbled, clutching the doorframe for dear life. Remus! Lily's voice came to him in an echo, as if he was at the bottom of a deep well. Her soft hands were on his shoulders, and she guided him down towards the floor, which was a good thing, because his legs had just decided to give up. She started rubbing his back slowly and was speaking very calmly. Deep breaths, Remus, do you hear me? In through your mouth, then out through your nose, okay? With me. 1, 2, 3. He didn't know what sort of magic that was, but it started to work, and after 10 deep breaths, he began to feel normal again. His vision clearing, he looked up. Lily was sitting beside him on the dusty bedroom floor. James was standing over them, looking worried. He had the letter. Thanks, Remus said, still short of breath. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. My sister has funny turns like that all the time when she gets anxious, Lily explained. Got anything sweet? She normally has a biscuit after the worst has passed. Yeah. Remus delved into his pocket for the chocolate frog Sirius had given him earlier. He unwrapped it and bit the head off, quickly. His mouth filled with rich sweetness, and he really did feel much better. He tried to get up, and James immediately offered a steady arm to help. Sorry I had to go, Mooney, he said, still sounding very worried. I was a right dick. No, I shouldn't have broken the door, Remus replied, carefully brushing his trousers down and walking to his bed to sit. Oh, that's nothing. Lily got up and withdrew her wand. Reparo, see? Can I have the letter back? Remus asked weakly. Yeah, sorry. James hurried to pass it back. Remus read it again. His stomach tightened, but he didn't get dizzy again. Love, Mum. I didn't know you'd sent her a letter, James said. I didn't know you even knew where she was. Your parents helped me, Remus said, still rereading. I only told Sirius about it. Oh, love. Lily came to sit by him. She squeezed his hand. Are you going to write back? Remus looked up, staring ahead. He made a decision. No, I'm going to see her. Oh, Lily squeaked. Yes, of course. I bet McGonagall would help you arrange it for the weekend, maybe. No. Remus shook his head. I'm going right now. What? James said. I've waited long enough, Remus said. I've got the address. I'm going. Remus, don't you want to just have a think? Lily started. No, Remus said, pulling his hand away from her. His hand brushed against the cigarette burn in his leg. Bugger! Where was he going to get another pair? Better try a mending spell once he'd calmed down a bit. He got up and went to his trunk to find a clean pair of trousers. Couldn't meet his mother with cigarette burns on his clothes, could he? No thinking, he said to Lily. She's in a hospital, God knows why, but I might not have long. He undressed without even thinking. Lily looked away quickly, blushing, but he didn't care. Prongs, he said. Can I have your cloak? Of course. James nodded without hesitation. Thanks. I'm going to try and apparate from Honeydukes, I think. Shouldn't be gone all night. I can be back before curfew, I bet. Good plan. James nodded. How are you going to get to Honeydukes? Lily asked, looking very confused. Remus looked at James curiously. The other boy gave a sheepish chuckle and pushed his glasses up his nose. There's sort of a secret passageway. Less than half an hour later, they had passed the hunchbacked witch statue and were about to begin the journey to Hogsmeade. They'd hurriedly dressed in muggle clothes, something Lily had suggested almost at the very last minute. James had wanted to tell Sirius and Peter, but Remus refused. Peter couldn't apparate anyway, and Remus didn't have room for Sirius in his head right now. Luckily, James respected this reasoning. How many more secrets do you lot have? Lily was whispering, staring about her as they progressed along the dark tunnel. Does she know about the map? Remus asked innocently. What map, Potter? What map? They weren't really fighting. It was just part of the fun for Lily and James, all the bickering. They'd spent so many years doing it already, they just didn't know how to stop. Remus liked it. It kept his mind off everything else. Because he'd calmed down now and the rational thoughts were starting to creep back in. Where are you going? Why would you think she wants to see you after all these years? You'll get caught out of bounds and expelled, and you'll drag Lily and James down with you. And Sirius. He wanted more than anything to have Sirius nearby, if only they weren't fighting. Perhaps he'd brought this all on himself, invoking Sirius's mother like that. Oh, God, what if Hope was like Walpurga? But he pressed on because he'd come this far now. Soon enough, they were in the cellar of Honeydukes, and all memorizing the hospital address, preparing to apparate. That part was easy. Remus was so full of emotions and adrenaline that he barely had to turn his head, and he was whooshing through space, following the current of magic towards Cardiff. Lily and James landed moments later, holding hands. This is Wales, then, Lily said, looking around at the quiet city street they found themselves on. Never been before? Me neither, James and Remus replied in unison. Let's look for the hospital, then, she smiled. She dropped James's hand and took Remus's instead, half leading him to the end of the road. They'd overshot by only a street or two. The main building was ornate, old and red brick, the rest of it 60s grey concrete. It had that cold institutional atmosphere which reminded Remus too much of St. Edmund's S. Right, Lily said brightly, facing a large map of the building beneath a signpost pointing in various directions. It was Sparrow Ward, wasn't it? So that's over there. She set off again, and Remus was so glad she was there, because everything in him was telling him to run away and never look back. Sparrow was in one of the concrete blocks. They stopped just outside. Lily? James, Remus said, holding them back. Do you mind not coming with me? I want to do it by myself. Sorry. Of course, Lily said, patting his shoulder. We'll wait right here, right, James? Okay. James nodded carefully. "Mooney, are you sure you don't want me to get—" "He won't come," Remus said with absolute certainty. "You were right, we did have a fight. I was awful to him. I said some really shitty stuff. He's angry and he's got a right to be. Yeah, but still." "It's fine, Prongs," Remus assured him. "I'm fine. Okay, I'm going in now." "Good luck," Lily smiled. He nodded grimly and approached the revolving doors. Inside the hospital, there were signs pointing in all sorts of directions, and 3 times Remus had to go back on himself because he'd taken a wrong turn or got in the wrong lift somewhere. It was an awful place. It stank of sickness and piss and disinfectant, masking blood and death. Remus's nerve was weakening by the minute. Finally, he passed through a set of double doors with Sparrow printed neatly above in blue and white. It led to a quieter corridor with a nurse's station at the end and lots of light-open rooms with neat rows of people lying in beds. Remus shuffled along to the nurse's station, trying to get a look at the names of the patients listed on the wall behind. "Who are you looking for, lovey?" a plump nurse asked him with a pleasant smile. Hope Jenkins," Remus mumbled. "Ah, relative are you?" "Yes, I'm her son." "Oh, she'll be so pleased. She talks about her kids all the time, does Hope. Just follow me, pet." He didn't have time to be stunned by this latest revelation that his mother had kids, plural. Speechless, Remus followed the nurse down the squeaky green lino corridor onto a ward with 6 or 8 beds in it. She led him to the far window, where light poured in. "Hope, my love, you've got a visitor. Your boy's come up to see you. Isn't that nice?" The nurse ushered him in, and he stood at the end of the bed, helplessly. The woman lying in the bed looked as though she had been dozing, though she was propped up in a half-sitting position. She was blinking now, disoriented, and frowned slightly at the nurse. "Who?" She spoke in a quiet, hoarse voice, still confused, until her dark eyes landed on Remus. Her pale eyebrows shot up. "Oh," she said. "Hello," he waved, feeling stupid. "I'll give you two some privacy," the nurse was saying now, drawing the pale hospital curtains around the bed. "Can I get anyone a cup of tea?" "No, thank you." They both replied, still staring at each other. She was very small and very frail, skeletal even, her bones and tendons showing through the skin. She looked much older than Remus had imagined, but perhaps that was just the illness. Her face was sunken and had a morbid, skull-like quality. He remembered how lovely she'd looked in her photograph and how pretty she might still be if she was well. More alert now, her watery black eyes stared up at him with an almost greedy glint, as if she was absorbing every inch of his gangly frame. He stood still and let her. "Oh," she whispered hoarsely, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, you look just like him." So this was his mother. He looked down at her and felt nothing at all. He cleared his throat. "I got your letter." He didn't know what else to say. He wished he hadn't come at all. "You didn't have to come," she replied softly. "I didn't dare ask you to. But I did want to see you. I've wanted to see you for years." She closed her eyes, and the tears ran tracks down her thin face. He bit his tongue. All sorts of foul, nasty things boiled in his throat, wanting to be spoken. But what use was it? She was clearly dying. He could smell it on her. Angry words would make no difference. She spoke again. "You're at Hogwarts?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Final year." He'd be so pleased, Lyle, your father. Silence again. Remus didn't want to look at her for too long. She looked so sad, so very weak and sick. "Is there anything you want to ask me?" Remus shrugged. This was more horrible than he could have imagined. She laughed softly. "You won't hurt my feelings, you know. This might be your only chance." She swallowed when he still did not speak. "All right then, I'll just tell you. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm not proud. I loved your father more than... Well, I loved him with all of my heart. He was everything to me. I wish you could have known him. When you were hurt and he died, I just didn't know what to do. I was so young, I was alone. I hadn't seen my own family in years, and I didn't even know the neighbours because Lyle said we had to keep things secret." She was Welsh, he recognised the accent now, the way she spoke his father's name in 2 gentle syllables, Lyle. He felt stupid for not realising, seeing as they were in Cardiff, but still, No one had ever told him she was Welsh. He supposed it wasn't pertinent information to anyone but him. "Look," he said, "it's fine. You don't have to explain." "I've thought about you," she said desperately. "Every day, my boy, my poor little boy." "Don't," he said, feeling uncomfortable, frightened even. "It's okay, please don't." He sat down in the stiff-backed hospital chair beside her. He didn't reach for her or hold her hand. That felt like too much. "I thought it was the best thing," she wept, the tears tickling down into the pillow she lay on. "I couldn't have looked after you. You were so strong even when you were that small. I had to lock you up. You were so frightened and you were crying for me and I couldn't go in." He felt as if a heavy block of ice had settled in the pit of his stomach. He just wanted her to stop talking. He didn't want to hear this. "You did the right thing," he said. "You did. You did everything you could. I never blamed you." That was true. He'd blamed his father over and over again in his head, hated him fiercely for years, but he had somehow felt more sympathy for his mother, a muggle who was left just as much at sea by Lyle's death as he was. "Does it still happen?" she asked, her eyes big. They were the same greeny brown as his own. He nodded. "It's not as bad," he lied. "I have help. It's safer." She looked relieved, which made him happy. "And school? I bet you're as clever as your dad." "I like school," he said. "I do pretty well." He wasn't sure what else to say about it. I have his wand, Lyle's." She smiled, paper white thin, stretching over her hollow face like a skull. "And do you have someone in your life looking after you?" He thought Lily and James, and Peter and Grant, and Madame Pumphrey, and Mary and Marlene, and even Professor McGonagall and Sirius. "Yeah, I do. I have friends." He glanced at the record player on her bedside table and the little pile of records on the chair. The Beatles, Cliff Richard, the Kinks. "Are these yours?" he asked, genuinely curious for the first time. "Oh, yes," she nodded. "Love a bit of a dance, I do. Lyle was the reader, but I'm happiest with a nice pop song. He used to tease me." Her accent was lovely, a sweet, friendly up and down. He was glad she wasn't posh. He hoped he didn't sound too common for her. "I like music too," he said softly. He couldn't bring himself to raise his voice, but she didn't mind. "David Bowie, mostly." "You must take after me," she said sleepily, still smiling. "My bouncy little boy. I used to set you down on the rug while I did the housework and play my records, and you'd jump around on your bottom and wriggle like you were dancing. Love Me Do was playing on the radio when you took your first steps." She'd grown tearful saying all this. Her eyes had welled up. "I think I remember," he said quickly. It was a lie, but it would make her happy. He didn't want her to be this sad, not for his sake. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand, gently, as if she might shatter. It was a very little hand. She was a very little woman. "I love the Beatles," he said. "Always have." She beamed. Even through the hollow cheeks and dark eyes of her illness, she had a lovely smile. Hope squeezed her son's hand and smiled up at him, and they were comfortable like that for quite some time. Remus felt the stirring of something towards her, something warm and old and familiar. Eventually, he offered to put some music on for her. "Oh, the player's broken," she replied. "Really, let me see." Remus fumbled in his pocket for his wand and gave the black wooden box a tap. He did it without letting go of her hand, and she made a small sound of delight and pride, seeing him use magic. The record began to turn, and the sound which came out was clear and lovely. It was a Fairport Convention record. Remus had never bothered with them much before, too hippie for him, but she smiled as Sandy Denny's lark song voice began to fill the room. So he listened. Across the evening sky all the birds are leaving, but how can they know it's time for them to go? Before the winter fire, I will still be dreaming. I have no thought of time, for who knows where the time goes? Who knows where the time goes? They both sat listening quietly to the music, and Remus saw that he got some of his shyness from her, maybe. She never held eye contact too long and never pushed him into talking. Remus had a sense that they could sit in contented silence like that for hours and understand each other just as well as if they'd done nothing but talk. In a little while the nurse came back. It was already after visiting hours, she said, and Matron would be on her case. Remus didn't want to go, and Hope didn't want him to leave. "Will you come back?" she pleaded, turning weepy again. "I will," he promised. "As soon as I can, I will." She pulled his hand to her lips. She was very weak, but he let her. She kissed his scarred knuckles. "I love you, my darling." Something inside him broke when he realized he couldn't say it back. He didn't know how to say it and mean it. "I'll see you soon," he promised again, hoping she didn't mind too much. He left the room in a daze, and it was a miracle he managed to get out of the hospital at all. It must have taken twice as long as it took him to get in. Outside, it had grown dark. Lily was sitting on a bench with a big black dog at her side. She stood up, the street light behind her illuminating her hair, seeming to set it alight, a halogen halo. "All right, Mooney?" she asked, eyes serious. He shrugged, speechless. Instantly, Lily stepped forward and wound her arms around his waist, laying her head against his chest and squeezing. He wrapped his arms around her, gratefully, and hugged her back, bowing his head to inhale the lovely apple skin smell of her. He was crying, and Sirius was right there, but he didn't care. He just let Lily keep squeezing him, feeling as if she was holding him together. He could hear Padfoot whining and panting. Finally he broke away, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry," he said bashfully. "Don't be stupid," she squeezed his arm, her own sea-green eyes shimmering. "Want to go home?" "Actually," Remus sniffed, "I want to get really, really pissed." Padfoot barked. Chapter 139, 7th Year Drunkards. "Right pub then?" Lily said, businesslike once more. "I think we'd better go back to Hogsmeade, don't you? I don't fancy our chances apparating back to Scotland drunk." "Yeah, good plan," Remus nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve, still sniffing. "Where's James?" "Well, we realised that it was going to look really suspicious if both the head boy and the head girl were missing," Lily laughed. "So he went back to cover for us. He sent Sirius. We both thought—" "It's okay," Remus nodded. He finally turned to address the dog sitting patiently by. "Sirius?" He transformed back at once and stood there looking awkward, rubbing one arm with the other. "Hello, Mooney," he said softly. "Hi." Remus nodded back, suddenly very shy. "Oh, Remus, I forgot." Lily broke the atmosphere. She handed him a small square cardboard box, a carton of silk cut. "James's idea," she shrugged. "Lifesaver, thanks." Remus accepted them gratefully. "I'd better go and get in touch with him, actually," Lily continued, glancing between the two boys. "Black, give me the mirror. I'll go and let him know where to meet us." Sirius handed her the compact, and she smiled at them both, before walking a little ways away so that she was just out of earshot. Remus sat down on the bench, opening the box of fags with his teeth, then pulling one out. He held it up to Sirius. "Light it for me. I'm so nervy it'll probably blow up in my face." Sirius clicked his fingers, and the cylinder lit. Remus sucked on it appreciatively. Sirius sat next to him. "Mooney, Sirius—" They both tried to speak at once, then smiled at each other timidly. "Sirius," Remus said, "I'm sorry. I was a twat." "You were." Sirius nodded, taking a cigarette of his own, "but you weren't completely wrong." "Nor were you," Remus sighed. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you, Remus." Sirius touched his knee gently, looking him in the eye. He was in Muggle clothes, which was a nice change, Remus thought. Black jeans and his black leather jacket. Remus smiled. "You look really good." "So what else is new?" Sirius stuck out his tongue. He turned solemn again. "I couldn't believe it when Prongs told me about the letter. I felt like shit for shouting at you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Then he said you'd gone." "Sorry," Remus replied. "I just had to get here straight away. I didn't even think." "I wouldn't have either," Sirius admitted. "Though actually, I don't know if I would exactly rush to my mother's bedside." Remus snorted, half-heartedly, and they were both quiet for a bit, thinking about their mothers. "What's she like?" Sirius asked finally. Remus considered this carefully before answering. He tried to recall her voice, her eyes, the way her hand felt in his. "She's nice," he said. "I think I like her." "All right, you two, ready?" Lily returned, obviously having judged them suitably made up. "Yeah," they both replied, smiling. They ended up in the 3 broomsticks, all 5 of them. James had brought Peter down from the castle with him. 3 fire whiskies in, and Remus was feeling pleasantly warm and loose, grinning dopily as his friends made a racket for his benefit. No one asked him any questions, which was perfect. They just drank and laughed and talked like real teenagers for once. "This map is some of the best magic I've ever seen," Lily marvelled, after studying it for some time. "And you only use it for pranks?" "What else would we use it for?" Sirius raised an eyebrow. "You've even got the moving staircases," Lily exclaimed, clearly delighted. "That was one of mine," Remus said eagerly. "It was all yours," Sirius said. "The whole thing was your idea, Mr. Mooney." "Yeah, but you lot did loads of work on it." "What are you going to do with it at the end of the year?" Lily asked. The 4 boys looked at each other with a note of sadness. The map would no longer be useful to them if they weren't at Hogwarts. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs would no longer be Hogwarts's premier mischief makers. James shrugged. "Pass it on, I suppose. Maybe to someone in the cooperative." Remus hated that idea and finished his 4th drink. "Rosmerta?" Sirius called out, raising a hand. "Another round, darling?" "Right you are, my love," she called back. "Flirt," Remus nudged him under the table. "I'm trying to get you drunk." Sirius replied piously, "As requested." "I'm already drunk," Lily slurred, blinking hard. "I don't know how I'm going to walk back to school." "I'll carry you," James said valiantly, though he was clearly starting to get a bit wobbly himself. "I don't want it to be over," Peter said morosely. "Calm down, Wormy, we're not going back yet," Sirius said as Rosmerta appeared with a tray of drinks. Remus grabbed another fire whiskey and knocked it back. He liked the burn. It felt like it was working. "I don't mean tonight," Peter said, clumsily slamming his chubby fist on the table. "I mean school. I mean everything." "School isn't everything." Lily patted him gently. "No," he sighed, "but it's all going to change, isn't it? We won't see each other all the time. We'll all have jobs." "Speak for yourself," Sirius laughed. "Some of us are independently wealthy. Anyway, of course we'll see each other every day, idiot. We're all moving in together." Lily and James looked at each other, suddenly sober. Sirius's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Mate," James said awkwardly, Lily and I have been talking about maybe getting a flat together after the summer." "Yeah," Sirius nodded. "We'll all move in and—" "Padfoot," Remus touched his knee. "He means just the 2 of them." "What? Why?" "Let's not talk about this now," Lily said hurriedly. "Nothing's decided." But everyone could see that it was. "What about this prank, then?" James said, still eyeing Sirius. "What are we going to do if no one comes up with anything good?" "We will," Remus said. "There's time. Is it me, or is the mass levitation idea starting to sound good?" "Oh, good, you are drunk," Sirius smirked. "How the fuck are we supposed to levitate 200 students, and why would we?" "Be funny." Remus shrugged, then giggled. Everything seemed like it would be funny right then. "There are enough of us," James said. "If everyone concentrates, we could easily levitate them all." "And do what with them? Practical jokes need a practical element," Sirius insisted. Everyone else burst out laughing at him. He shook his head disdainfully and took a swig of his butterbeer. "You're not drinking?" Remus said suddenly. No." Sirius looked down self-consciously. "Thought someone better stay responsible enough to get you lot back in one piece." "Ah," Lily grinned dopily. "You do care, Black. You're all soft and sensitive, really, aren't you? I just don't want anyone expelled before we can get this prank off the ground." "Off the ground? So you agree with the levitation idea?" James cackled. "Oh, for goodness sake." Sirius rolled his eyes. "I'm going to the loo." He got up and left them laughing. Remus took the opportunity to pop out for a cigarette. He could have smoked in the pub and thought that Lily and James might even let him get away with it, but he wanted a minute to himself. Outside was nice and cool, the air felt clean. He lit up and started puffing away, wrapping his arms around himself against the chill. He was really drunk. He had to lean against the wall just to stay up. It was nice. He didn't have to worry about anything if he was drunk. No one would expect him to. He leaned his head back against the wall, catching sight of the pale crescent moon glowing through the scudding clouds. He thought about Livia, as he often did when he saw the moon, and Castor. He thought about their warning and how it had been so meaningless in the end. Why was that? Remus's whiskey-addled mind hit on something he hadn't thought about before, but as soon as it was there, it was gone again. He shook his head dazedly. "All right," Sirius came out and joined him. Remus nodded, smiling widely. "Pisshead." Sirius smirked. "Oi!" Remus shot back playfully. "I can hold my drink. Thank you very much. Unlike some." "Oh, yeah," Sirius humoured him, leaning against the wall too. He took Remus's hand and laced their fingers together. "Yeah," Remus nodded emphatically. "Remember my 15th? You and Pete got so wankered you threw up in the tunnel." "Godric, how could I forget?" Sirius laughed. "Horrific!" "Nah," Remus sighed happily, squeezing Sirius's fingers. "It was nice. You fell asleep on my shoulder and told me I was magic." "Did I?" "You did. That does sound nice. I must have been very drunk." He laughed. "Not that I don't think you're magic, Moony." Remus's mind had drifted, though. His cigarette had gone out, and he dropped it. "Wish I could say stuff like that." "Like what?" Sirius frowned. "Nice stuff." "You say lots of nice stuff, Moony." Remus shook his head, frowning. It was no good. "Need another drink?" "Okay, come on then." Inside, Peter was half asleep, propped up on his elbow, and Lily was sitting in James' lap. She seemed to be trying to locate his tonsils with her tongue. "Bloody hell," Sirius groaned. "Give it a rest, you two." Remus sniggered, finishing the last of his whiskey. That was better. "You can talk," Lily poked her pink tongue out at him. "Marlene told me she caught you two snogging in the corridor the other night." "So what if she did?" Sirius replied primly. "It was private enough until she showed up." "Christopher was there," Remus put in. Lily laughed and pointed at Sirius. "Ha, exhibitionist." "She's right." Remus nodded drunkenly. "You are. Remember, I caught you with Mary all the time when I was a prefect." "Oh, well, that was Mary. You know what Mary's like." "Remus," Lily said, still giggling and quite pink in the face now. "You won't believe what Mary told me about you last year." "What?" "It was before you came out, so you'd think she'd admit it was made up by now, but she told me and Marlene that you and she, you know—" "Made sweet heterosexual love," Sirius supplied, barely stifling his own laughter now. "Oh," Remus said. "Yeah, that's true, actually." "What?" Lily stared at him, her mouth open. "Ages ago. Last year, actually," Sirius corrected. "It's fine, Lily. He only did it to make me jealous." "Arrogant prick," Remus snorted. Peter began to snore. James looked at him, then at his pocket watch. "Reckon we'd better head back?" Remus insisted on finishing not only his drink, but everyone else's before they left. He wanted to be good and drunk, so that he would fall straight to sleep, without any of the intrusive thoughts that had been plaguing him since Marlene's return. Plus, though he wasn't going to tell Sirius, his hip didn't hurt as much with all that liquor in his blood. James was true to his word and gave Lily a piggyback all the way to Honeydukes. Remus looked at Sirius with a quirked eyebrow. The other boy laughed. "I'll levitate you if you want, but I am not carrying you." "Who says romance is dead?" Peter yawned, rubbing his eyes and trailing along beside them. By the time they were descending the steps into the cellar of the sweet shop, Remus was feeling a lot less cheerful about the whole thing. Perhaps the last few whiskies had been a bad idea. His head was starting to throb painfully, and his vision was swimming. His limbs felt heavy, and as they sank into the darkness of the tunnel, he quite fancied just curling up to sleep right there. "No one'll miss us," he mumbled, as Sirius gently pulled him along. "It's a weekend tomorrow." "I really don't think you'll be happy waking up here, Moony," Sirius chided gently. "Trust me." "I trust you," Remus replied, his mouth thick with saliva. It was all right for Peter. He'd transformed into a rat and curled up to sleep in Lily's pocket. "He's so good at that," Sirius marvelled. "I can't transform drunk." "I can," James said excitedly, and promptly did, much to Lily's fright. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "I'm never going to get used to that." Prongs bowed his antlered head and lowered one knee, allowing Lily to climb onto his back. She gripped his neck, grinning, and whooped as James set off clattering down the tunnel at a gallop. Remus and Sirius stared after them as they vanished into the darkness. "Charming," Sirius huffed. "Why aren't you a more useful animal?" Remus grumbled, leaning heavily against him. "It's not like we got to choose." Remus groaned. "I'm going to be sick." "Ugh, over there then." Sirius grabbed him by the shoulders and turned him around just in time. Luckily, Remus hadn't eaten much that day, but it still felt horrible. His gut contracted painfully, and he retched until his eyes bulged, and he thought he'd choke. His eyes were stinging with tears when he finally came up for air. He rubbed them away quickly. Sirius handed him a goblet of cold water. "Where did you get that?" Remus spluttered, wiping his mouth. "Keep it on me for the full moons," Sirius shrugged. "Weightlessness charm. Must have left it in my pocket. Oi, just sip it or you'll chuck it all up again." Remus obeyed. He washed his mouth out and spat. "Sorry," he said weakly. "That's disgusting." "Call it payback for your 15th. Sirius laughed. "Come on, shall we keep going?" Remus nodded, a hand on Sirius's shoulder to keep himself steady. "Shouldn't have got so drunk," he mumbled. "You deserved it," Sirius replied blasé. "After the day you've had, or the week you've had—" "I was a prick." Remus was getting melancholy now, feeling sorry for himself. Sirius wasn't having any of it. "Enough of that now we've talked about it." "I am a prick, though." "No, you're lovely," Sirius insisted. "I don't have any feelings," Remus moped. "What are you on about? Of course you've got feelings. Look, we're nearly there now. Ugh, those bastards have gone on without us. Hey, do you reckon Prongs figured out how to change back?" "She told me she loves me," Remus said, his forehead on Sirius's shoulder now. "What? Who? Oh, right." Sirius stopped to check he was okay. He tried to be comforting. "Well, that's good, isn't it? Nice to hear that." "I didn't say it back." "Oh, Mooney, that's to be expected. Doesn't mean you haven't got feelings. I know you've got your heart set on being a monster, but I'm sorry to tell you that you are not." "Couldn't say it," Remus insisted, his voice muffled. "I don't think I can say it to anyone, even if I want to." Sirius went very quiet and very still for a while. They were at the entrance of the tunnel now. In a few moments they would be back inside the castle. Sirius gave Remus a quick hug, stroking his hair gently. He pulled away and held his hand tightly. "That's okay, Remus," he whispered, even though they were alone. "That's okay, because it's not something you say. It's something you do, right?" "Right." Remus nodded, tearful and drunk, but somewhat placated. "Good," Sirius smiled again. "Now let's get you to bed, eh?" Remus agreed. Just as Sirius was pushing the statue of the humpbacked witch aside, Remus touched his arm. "Sirius?" "Yeah, you're magic." Chapter 140, 7th year, Brilliant Ideas. Saturday, the 25th of February, 1978. Remus didn't think he had ever hated fire whiskey more. When he woke up the next morning, his throat was raw, his limbs ached, and his head was throbbing. He'd take a full moon over a hangover any day. At least after a full moon, everyone was sympathetic. Someone else groaned from their bed. There were loud footsteps as whoever it was ran to the bathroom, slammed the door, and began to throw up noisily. "Lovely," Sirius murmured from the pillow next to Remus. "All right in there, Pete," James shouted. He was met with an alarming gurgling sound from within the bathroom. "Bit of breakfast'll sort you out," James advised. Remus heard James's feet hit the floor. He began to whistle a jaunty tune, Bloody Perfect Potter and his immunity to hangovers. Remus's stomach growled. Breakfast sounded good, despite the stabbing pain behind his eyeballs. Sirius raised his head at the noise and grinned. "All right, Mooney." He nodded weakly. "Thirsty, hungry." Suppose I'm not getting my Saturday lie-in, then. Sirius sighed overdramatically. He whipped back the duvet, then the curtains to climb out. Remus sat up slowly. "Pyjamas?" he grumbled, feeling around under his pillow. "Yeah, you put up a bit of a fight on that front," Sirius chuckled, stretching and yawning. "Said you were too hot. You threw them across the room, and I gave up." "Defeatist," Remus replied, clambering out of bed in his boxers to look for them. He'd have to go and use the shared bathroom up the hall. It didn't sound like Peter would be coming out any time soon. His eyes stung in the bright morning sunlight, and he bent over, feeling about on the floor for his pyjama shirt and bottoms like a confused gibbon. "Morning, lads," Lily said from the end of James's bed. "Shit!" Remus jumped, surprised, and covered his crotch with the nearest Quidditch magazine, then dived back behind his bed curtain. "What the bloody hell are you doing here?" "I slept here," Lily replied, a grin in her voice. "I didn't know you two shared a bed." "I didn't know you two shared a bed," Sirius replied indignantly. He threw Remus his pyjamas. "There you are, Moony. Make yourself decent." Remus was going to kill James. What did he think he was playing at, inviting girls into their bedroom? Surely there was an unwritten rule on that. Was nowhere sacred? He pulled his pyjamas on as quick as he could over his underwear, then hurried out of the room. "I didn't see anything," Lily called after him, giggling. Christ, thank goodness it was Saturday. They made slow progress to breakfast, but in the end even Peter made it down, though he was still very pale and quiet and just sat sipping his tea. Remus, meanwhile, loaded his plate up until he couldn't see the china pattern. Weekend breakfasts were the best: fried eggs, thick Cumberland sausages, dark fried mushrooms, bacon, golden toast slathered in butter, baked beans, fried tomato, black pudding. He was seriously going to miss Hogwarts food. "Why is Remus eating a hangover breakfast?" Mary asked, pouring herself some orange juice. "And where were you all yesterday afternoon?" "Think you've answered your own question, MacDonald," Sirius winked. "You lot have all the fun," she grumbled. "Not fun," Peter replied, his head in his hands. "Bad time." "Have something to eat, Wormtail," Remus suggested, swallowing his own mouthful. "You'll feel better." "I think he's frightened he'll lose an arm," Sirius smirked as Remus reached for another portion of bacon. "Yeah, that was the last slice of toast, Moony," James complained. "Oh, for goodness sake, the plates refill, don't they?" Remus rolled his eyes. "Always wondered how that happens," Mary mused, watching as the toast rack was magically replenished. "It's not that complicated," Sirius said. "Basic teleportation spell. The house elves have tables directly beneath us in the kitchens. They load that up, then transport the food to the corresponding plates above. Sort of like a magical dumbwaiter." Remus nodded, now constructing himself a very complex sandwich. "Sounds complicated to me," Mary said. "I'm useless at teleportation, though. I had to retake my apparition test 3 times. "It's easier with inanimate objects," Remus said, helping himself to ketchup. "And they're only sending it directly up, so the destination part doesn't take as much effort." "I tried using it to clean my room once," Sirius said. "I just transported all the messy stuff into the room above mine. Except I couldn't get it back again after. My mother had an impenetrable lock on the attic, and I accidentally transported my bed, so that caused a bit of a row." James and Remus sniggered. Peter raised his head. He said. "What?" Lily asked. "You're not going to be sick again, are you?" "No, I'm just thinking." "Merlin," Sirius teased. "Better get him a pain-killing draught." Peter diligently ignored him, eyes focused on the plates of food. "Could we do it on a bigger scale?" he asked. "The transportation thing." "You mean like getting food from the kitchens to our dorm?" Remus asked. "I don't think so. I think only the house elves can do it. Would be great, though." "No," Peter frowned, shaking his head. "More like what Sirius was saying, with beds and trunks and furniture." "Yeah, probably," Sirius shrugged. "I'm guessing that's how everything ends up on the train at the end of term. Powerful bit of magic, though. It took me half a day to do my bedroom. Mind you, I was 14. We've got a lot of people, though, Peter said, now looking up at James, grinning. We could do it. Peter, James was starting to smile now too. Have you just had your best bloody idea in 7 years of pranking? Peter grinned back at him, looking happier than Remus had seen him in ages. Emergency cooperative meeting, James carried on, standing up excitedly. Spread the word. The problem with planning a prank between 30 people rather than 4 was pure logistics. Between Quidditch practices, clubs, Newty and Owl revision and room availability, calling an emergency meeting was nearly impossible. It ended up being pushed back to Sunday, then Monday, then, much to James's exasperation, their usual Wednesday slot. There's still plenty of time, Lily soothed, and we can always start researching it now, so we have the right spells ready to show the group. Suppose, James muttered, scuffing his feet on the flagstones as they walked back to the common room. I've got some dung bombs lying about, if you fancy blowing off some steam today. Sirius threw an arm around James. Yes! I can't hear this. Lily covered her ears and ran ahead to catch up with Mary. On the fat lady's corridor, Remus paused. You lot go on, I'll just be a minute. He stopped outside Professor McGonagall's office door. Sirius glanced back and gave him a nod of understanding before carrying on with James and Peter, loudly arguing over the best place to plant the dung bombs. Remus knocked on the office door timidly. Enter, came a voice from within. He pushed the door open and poked his head around nervously before going inside. Hello, Professor, he said, approaching her desk. McGonagall was marking some essays piled up neatly in front of her, a red quill flicking smoothly across the parchment as she read. She looked up and smiled at him pleasantly. Lupin, lovely to see you. Please have a seat. He sat carefully, strangely reminded of the very first time he'd been in her office, and how tall and frightening she had seemed. He'd really thought he would hate her. She'd seemed so much like Matron. Now he was able to meet her eye and smile back as though she were a real friend. How can I help? She asked, as the red quill came to rest in the inkwell beside the papers. I wanted to ask a favour, he said carefully. He felt inside his pockets and pulled out the letter from his mother. He put it on the desk and slid it across. Over Christmas, the Potters helped me track down my mum. I wrote to her and she wrote back. She's in a Muggle hospital in Wales. I'd like to have permission to go and see her. McGonagall only glanced down at the letter briefly before looking at him again. Of course, we can make arrangements as soon as you'd like. Really? He was amazed it had been that easy. Really, she replied. Mr. Lupin, this is a school, not a prison. Students are permitted to visit family members. Oh, well, great. I thought maybe on the next Hogsmeade weekend. Certainly. She opened a notebook and jotted something down. Come and see me on the morning of, and I'll write your permission slip. Thank you. Would you like somebody to go with you? No, thanks, but no. Now that he'd done it once, he realized that it was something he needed to do alone. He wasn't looking forward to breaking that to Sirius, but there was no helping it. I'm very pleased for you, Remus, McGonagall said, smiling again. You know that my door is always open if you need somebody to talk to, though I know you aren't short of friends. Thanks, he looked down bashfully. How is your revision going, Mr. Lupin? Good, thanks, Remus nodded, glad to be onto an easier subject. Better than good from what I've heard, she continued, smiling. All of your professors have given excellent reports on your achievements. In most classes, you're performing well above your peers, and I hear you've not only been working hard for yourself, but to help others too. The study groups are a collaborative thing, Remus said awkwardly. Nevertheless, Professor McGonagall shook her head. I'm proud to have you in my house, Mr. Lupin. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just looked at his hands. Mr. Lupin, his head of house continued, I have a favour to ask. A favour? Remus looked up, surprised. What on earth? Ahem, yes. McGonagall looked a bit sheepish and leaned in slightly. As I'm sure you know, the final Quidditch match of the year will be taking place in April, just before exams. Yeah, James has the schedule posted up in our room with an enchanted countdown in seconds and everything. McGonagall smiled fondly. James has been an absolute asset to the team. He's led Gryffindor on a record-winning streak during his time here. The team he has assembled is first-rate, primed to win their 6th cup in as many years. Which brings me to my problem. You want my help with a Quidditch problem? Indeed. Now, I cannot go into too much detail, but I am sorry to say that Alexander Gordon, our beater, will be returning home for the rest of the term. I shall be telling Potter on Monday, of course. A replacement must be found as soon as possible, which is why I wanted to speak with you first. Professor, I'm awful at Quidditch, Remus said, breaking out in a cold sweat. McGonagall stared at him with a frown for a moment before breaking into a highly out-of-character chuckle. She raised her hand to her mouth, apologetically. Goodness, Lupin, I didn't mean to suggest, though I'm sure you are quite capable on a broom, it wasn't you I had in mind. Oh, Remus exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Oh, good. Then how can I help? Well, McGonagall turned serious once more. We do have rather a good beater already in Gryffindor, but as you are aware, he was struck off the team 2 years ago. Sirius. Now, I don't wish to condone his behaviour, nor diminish the enormity of the incident which occurred in your 5th year. No, Remus swallowed, finding his mouth quite dry. He didn't like to think about that, not ever. Like his hip, it was a pain which sometimes surfaced, but that he had to ignore in order to keep going. And I stand by the punishment he received, his teacher continued. But, well, he was only struck off the team. He wasn't placed under permanent ban. Right, Remus nodded soberly. So he can play again if he wants to. Remus, I'm not going to allow it unless you agree, McGonagall said, placing a hand on the desk between them. It was you that Sirius put in danger, and if you feel... No, Remus said. Yes, let him back on the team. Are you sure? She peered over her spectacles at him, as if trying to read his expression. Absolutely, Remus forced a smile. Of course, it was 2 years ago. McGonagall watched him a bit longer, then smiled back, visibly relieved. He'd done the right thing then, the thing she'd wanted. Thank you, Mr. Lupin, she nodded, leaning back again. I'll tell Potter first thing tomorrow. Great. Remus nodded, getting up from his seat. Thanks, Professor. See you Monday.